The wall held the night like a breath, cold and unspent, the vast blue of it rising into stars that seemed fixed in the ice itself. Jon Snow stood upon the topmost walkway where the wind had planed the rime to a glass-slick sheen, his gloved hand on the frozen merlin, his breath a pale ribbon that drifted southward and vanished over the abyss of dark forest. Below him the world was a bruise-colored plain and trees that would not end. Above him, the moon was a cut bone, and the wall creaked the way an old ship creaks in a sea of winter. Far along the line of frostbound ramparts, torches guttered at long intervals, where other men kept other vigils and counted their own heartbeats to prove they were still alive. He listened to the quiet and tried to make it honest. The quiet had tricks. It folded itself around the ring of iron from a far-off pulley, around the soft scuff of fur boots on planks he could not see, around the wing slap of a raven changing perches somewhere below. If he waited, he could make the quiet sound like Ygritte's breathing in the dark of the half-collapsed watchtower. The smell of her hair like fresh-cut peat and rain. He could make it sound like her laugh in the caves, like the echo of warm water. Then he would swallow too hard, and the quiet would break, and he would be back upon the wall again, in his cloak and black, with the sword at his hip, and the bow unstrung at his feet, and a long night's work before him. "Anything?" Pip asked, face masked in a scarf so only his eyes showed. The eyes were bright and human and stubborn against the cold. "Only the same trees, and the same silence, and the same stars," Jon said. He flexed his hand within the glove, and felt the ache in the knuckles from not moving. "Where's Gren?" "Fetching oil, I think. Or warming his hands by it. No fault if he's both. I'd roast mine in the kettle if I could get them off." Jon's mouth twitched in a shadow of a smile. "Keep them on tonight at least." "I was hoping to trade one for stew," Pip said. And then the wind came harder for a moment, and both men leaned into it, as if some great invisible beast pressed its chest upon theirs. The gust hissed along the teeth of the parapet and made the torches gutter low, then flammy bright. When it passed, the night felt emptier, as though something had stepped back and was waiting. He could tell the hour by the sting in his cheekbones and the taste of iron in the air. Dawn would be late and blue, pushing its way along the ground from the east like a pale fire under the trees. And when it came, the frost would sparkle, and the dead grass will reveal its color one heartbeat at a time. He imagined the wildling camp beyond the forest edge. Fires banked low, wolves gone silent, men sleeping hunched beside their axes, the smell of soot in their hair. Mance Rayder would be awake. Jon had never known the man to be otherwise in his thoughts. He looked to the north, to the black line of pines and the deeper black beyond, and let his mind circle it, the way a hawk circles a field. Mance would be awake, and not alone. Tormund Giantsbane, with his great laugh and bigger appetite, his tenderness for sons and daughters, and his boastful names. The Weeper, with frost in his beard like salt, and those pale lashes that made him look like a dead man who had remembered how to grin. The Thens, with their bronze and discipline, their Magnar who wore civilization like a skin he might discard if it grew too tight. And somewhere that dangerous quiet man named Varamir, who moved in more kinds of flesh than most men had thoughts. Jon's memories were not stars but sparks that a smith knocks from iron when he hammers it. He let them fall and fade. On the second lamp from the left, ice had formed a lip from years of drip and freeze. It caught the torchlight and threw it back in a mellow coin-bright smear. He caught himself studying it again, as if it would change. The wall made men small. That was its work. It made kings into ravens and ravens into shadows and shadows into silence. Men went up upon it and returned with a different gait and a different set to their mouth. And if they stayed too long, they forgot softer places. Down in the yard, Donal Noy would be awake in the smithy, pushing coals and cursing at the way iron sulked in such cold. Jon could almost feel the warmth of that cramped chamber, and the reek of worked metal, and the comfort of the anvil's ring. He wondered if it comforted the one-armed smith to bang at metal and make it obey when so much else would not. Elsewhere in the dark maester, Aemon would be sitting as he sat, a blanket around his bony shoulders and a raven on his withered hand. Blind white eyes turned inward toward a sun the rest of them could not see. Samwell Tarly would be somewhere near him, too anxious to sleep, reading aloud from some book he did not understand and would never understand fully. And below all that, In the ice and old bones of the wall itself, old things waited with patient breath. "Give me your ear," Pip said, and John could not help it. He bent his head, and Pip cupped his gloved hands around Joan's ear as if telling a secret. "I hate this silence." "I know," John said. "And me too. It's like the last quiet before a song you don't want to hear," Pip murmured. "Then we'll make our own song," John said. And when Pip stepped back, John lifted his bow and strung it with motions that were slow and careful, so that the string did not creak and the horn tips did not chatter against the wood. He set an arrow to the rest out of habit, his fingers finding their places through fur and leather, by feel alone. He did not expect to shoot it soon. He did not expect not to either. You learn to hold both. Far north of them, across a low field where the snow had drifted into long backs like sleeping beasts, a tent stood up like a tooth, patched with dark cloth and a panel of silk that moved differently in the wind. Inside it, the air was warmer, little more than a breath, but enough for fingers to feel returning life, as if a second pulse beat in them. Mance Rayder held a harp against his knee, and his thumb tugged a soft string. The sound was so soft it was almost not a sound. It lived in the wood, and the fiber, and the meat of his hand, and went no further. He tapped his foot in time with a tune he did not play. In another life he had used such things to make nobles remember how to cry, to remember wine and summer and a father's hand. In this one he used it to touch the map of his mind. Dalla slept under furs with one hand upon the place where their child turned. Val, her sister, sat braiding her hair with a knife as comb, eyes half shut in the lamplight. Tormund lay sprawled like a bear beside the brazier, mouth open, snoring through a throat that had been scarred by winter too many times and in too many ways. The Magnar of then stood at the entry, bronze polished and furs perfect, a vigilance in him that was not weariness and not pride, but something that shared both. "You think that noise will keep you safe?" the Magnar asked without turning. "I think it keeps my hands honest," Mance said, smiling with half his mouth. "The rest will have to see to with other tools." "You could have kept the black," the Magnar said. "You could have worn iron and law, and let the ice be your wall forever." Mance's smile thinned. "Forever is shorter than you think, when cold walks and looks back at you." He set the harp aside and rolled the map up with careful fingers. "Besides, I never was good at doing as I was told." Tormund stirred and opened his eyes, and grinned huge and ugly. "I heard my name in a dream," he said, his voice big as the tent. "Was it Val then, or my goat?" "Neither. Gods be good," Val said, amused and bored both. "You'd have to bathe before your name had the courage to visit me." "Harsh I the morning," Tormund said happily, sitting up and thumping the heart of his belly. "Give me something sweet to listen to." He eyed the harp, then Mance, then spread his hands. "Or give me something hard to hit." "You'll have both," Mance said. "If the gods have humor." The Magnar glanced back. "All is in place," he said simply. "If your plan is the same. Plans don't improve just because you pace them," Mance said mildly. He stood and smoothed the silk of his odd patch of cloak between fingers that had once stitched it into black wool. Red and black it had been, and dragon silk cut from a tent where Targaryens had once breathed. He remembered the feel of it against his back the first night he wore it north of the wall, and laughed so hard he had to sit down. He remembered the look in Corin Halfhand's eye when he saw it, and said nothing, and said everything. He remembered that there is no man alive whom one story can hold. He stepped to the tent flap and lifted it, and the cold bit his eyes with little white teeth. The moon laid a road across the snow, and the trees were soldiers, and the wall was a mountain that men had carved and forgotten to worship. He stood a little while and watched the frost smoke from the nostrils of the mammoths, and listened to the low talk of men who said little because what they had to do would speak for them soon. He heard the wolves. He heard other things and did not name them. Varamir stepped out of darkness as if he had grown from it, narrow face set, a long fur thrown over one shoulder, and a certain rudeness in his walk that did not come from his body, but from whatever else of him was out there between the trees. "All set," he said. "The Alarks roost where you wanted them. My owl sees the top of the wall, clear as if it were under a noonday sun. They watch, but they are tired. The fat boy reads. The blind man is wise. His voice made any kindness into an insult. And the weeper? Mance asked. Happier than any man has a right to be, Varamir said dryly. He likes to count. He liked counting knives tonight, and men. Let him like it, Mance said. He can do worse harm with his cheer than with his steel. He glanced at the Magnar. Your men will move when they see the signal. When the mammoths take the first gate, they cannot be allowed to rest. The Magnar's mouth put a little quake at its corner, the closest he came to a smile. My men do not rest. Even iron bends in cold, Mance said. You keep them moving and they'll remember being hot. Tormund slapped his thighs and stood and craned his neck and let out a sound that was half yawn and half battle cry. Gods, but I'm ready to piss on that ice, he said. You ever piss on a thing and watch it steam like a cauldron? That's me and the wall. We will be old friends. Aye, and there will be stories of how I pissed the wall down. Now, try not to drown yourself, Val said, and Tormund beamed. Mance lowered the tent flap and stood with his face in the cold. He could feel the night like a hand around his throat, not squeezing but reminding him of what it could do. He had been a crow once, and the wall had lived inside him like a wound that would not heal. He had stood atop it and told himself he belonged to the thing that made other men small. He had sung in halls to men who feared dragons and to women who feared their husbands, and he had worn black and slept in cells and eaten salt beef that had no kindness to it. Then, in a tent of red and black silk, a woman with eyes like river water had smiled at his fingers on the harp, and he knew that the songs south of the wall and the songs north of it were both only verses of the same thing. He had stolen that silk and stitched it into his cloak, because a man who would be king should wear a piece of the world he means to rule, and because there is no softer armor than a story worn close. He turned and caught Val watching him, and knew she was measuring him as if he were a horse. He gave her his most honest face. It looked like a liar's face in the light, and he did not mind. For once, Val said. Do not be clever. For once let it be strength. It will be both, Mance said. I am greedy. She shook her head. Dalla dreamed of a gate opening. Her hand lay flat against the swell of her sister's belly. If your talk fails, and your cleverness breaks, and your strength has all been spent, remember a dream can be wiser than you. Dreams are for directions, Mance said. Men are for walking. Then walk carefully, Val said, as if she were telling a child to step softly across new ice. Mance stepped out among his captains and his beasts and his foolish almost kingdom. He lifted his head and listened again to the quiet. He knew the hours of the wall, the way a fisherman knows the pull of a particular river. Dawn would come dirty and slow, the sort of day born too tired to stand, and in that fatigue the men in black would take off a glove to scratch, to rub warmth into a thumb, to piss, to look away from what did not move, because nothing ever moved there. In that softness men died, or triumphed. He spun his fingers once in the air as if beginning a tune. The first signal went up where a crooked pine bent toward the wall like a penitent. It was not a torch held high. All torches are obvious, but a simple, patient flame coaxed up through a column of oil-soaked moss that made no smoke and threw no sparks, and only glowed with a color that was not the color of fire. Varamir's owl saw it first and blinked again as if the world had changed its rules. Then 3 more fires glowed faint in the night, a pattern not made for human eyes, and men who had been waiting for the world to remember them finally grinned and put their feet where they had promised they would. Jon Snow saw nothing at first. The wind had died the way a thought dies, without leaving a body behind. He shifted his stance and listened, and all he heard was his blood. Then a raven flew past him close enough that the thin wisp of its wing brushed his cheek like the idea of a kiss. It made him shiver far too much. "Jon?" Pip said. "I don't know yet," Jon answered. But the wall knew. It said so with a small settling groan, that in summer might have been nothing. But here and now was a word you could not translate, only feel. Somewhere, faint as if underwater, came the throaty trump of a horn. Then, almost gentle, a second, Then the third that made the hairs on Joan's arms stand up beneath the layers. He could have named those horns in a dozen ways, their timbre, their maker, their mood, and it would not have mattered, because the one thing that mattered was that they were from the wrong side. He bent and slid the arrow's nock into the string so that it kissed. He did not draw. He leaned into the merlon and let his eye go to the notches between the blocks of ice and the parapet, so he could see down without becoming a target for whatever knight had hands enough to throw. He saw only dark. Then he saw darker moving in the dark, a shiver rolling along the tree line where no wind went, and something vast that moved with a patient slowness men never use because they have too little time. Mammoths, he said. God. Pate breathed, not as a prayer but as a complaint. Gods, no. It was always going to be, John said. Wake, Gren. Tell him to tell Donal Noy the northern gate will be tested. Get the oil. Then? Pip, left in a scuffle of fur and leather and frost, squeaking underfoot. John felt for his horn and did not blow it. He watched. Men had died because someone called wolf, where there was only wind. He would not add to the stack. Below, the dark rolled forward and unbent itself into separate bodies. He saw the whites of eyes and the flash of teeth, and the faint glow of iron even in that light, and the mammoths with their swinging heads and their tusks like nightmare scythes. There were giants behind them, walking like men with the weight of mountains on their shoulders, and between the big shapes flowed human ones, fast and flickering and various, all the tribes of the true north. They had torches shielded and dark, and then revealed, and then dark again as if the earth itself took breath. John put the horn to his lips and blew one long note that froze and fell and shattered against the ice in a spill of sound. The torches along the walkway flared into human attention. Men came up from the stairs in twos and threes, drawing cloaks close and stamping their feet. Gren appeared, and behind him Pip, and further down Satin with the fat by his mouth gone hard, where he had breathed too long into his scarf. The men looked at John's face and believed his horn more for what they saw there. Positions, John called, and his voice came out level and strange and belonged to a man he had not entirely met. Oil pots thumped to the parapet, the thick black of them sucking in what little light there was. The smell of pitch rose. The archers strung. The men with the hand scythes checked the strands that held the barrels in place above the tunnel mouth. From below, a horn answered. It was not like theirs, not fashioned to bully sound out of the night, but something old and wrapped in a kind of disdain. It mocked the cold instead of fighting it, and the cold mocked them back. John had no wish to hear it a second time, and of course the night gave him a second, and then more, until the sound became less a horn and more the insistence of water through a carved channel. Mance was playing a song then. Very well. Loose, John said softly, and arrows hissed down like sleet. One struck a mammoth's hide and stuck there as if it had found a new home and wished to be polite. One feathered a man who threw up his arms and laughed at the pin in his skin. One took a torch and made it blossom too fast, briefly showing faces like ghosts before smoke sucked it back down. Men cursed. Men prayed. Someone's bowstring snapped with a sound like a bad idea. John shot and shot again, and did not waste time watching what his arrows did after they left him. He knew their minds. He knew their joy. The first mammoth hit the gate timbers before the men below it were ready to sing, and the crash shook the walkway like a cough shakes a sick body. John felt it in his teeth. The second blow came sooner because men always speed up when the first blow does not do what they want. The third moved the world in a way that could not be ignored. John waved an arm, and the men on the winch swung the oil barrels, and the ropes creaked, and the barrels tipped, and the black stuff poured and spread and gleamed in the low light like a lie. Gren had the torch. He met Joan's eye once, and made a face that was all apology and bravado, and tosses of dice. He held the brand low for a breath as if the fire were testing him, and he were testing it back. Then he threw it. For a heartbeat nothing believed in fire. Then everything did. Flame climbed the timbers and the oil, and took hold the way a rumor takes hold of a frightened town, eager and ferocious and wrong in a dozen simple ways. The mammoth roared, a sound like the break in a mountain. The men below scattered backward and forward at once in that special panic. That happens when the path your human mind sees is not the path your animal feet will take. A giant brought up a great hide screened with wet, and men hauled it into place, and the next moment the fire found itself in argument with something thicker than itself. It hissed and sulked, and split into rivers that did not run the way water runs, and the men used their poles and threw snow where it mattered, and not where it did not. Good, John said, not because he liked what he saw, but because liking it had nothing to do with whether it needed to be done. He drew and loosed and drew and loosed, and lost the distinction between those acts, fell into the body's knowledge that bows have and men learn. Somewhere to his left, Pip cursed and coughed. Somewhere to his right, Satin laughed once. A crazy, thin sound that might have been bravado and might have been his life leaving and then returning, because of some bargain he did not understand. Down in the smithy, Donal Noy lifted his head at the first horn as a wolf does when the wind shifts. He set down the tongs and wiped his mouth on the back of his arm, and did not look at the stump where his hand had been, because he never looked at it when there was work to be done. The iron in the brazier had gone past the color that had names, and into the white where men begin to make mistakes because they think heat is an ally. He set 3 blows into the shape, because 3 blows are for a promise, and 5 are for a vow, and 7 are for a curse. Then he left it and reached for the big hammer, because a man with one hand picks up what he can. Smith, Gren panted in the doorway. All boy under the soot. They're at the gate. Of course they're at the gate, Noy said without grudge and without surprise. They wouldn't write us a note. He took a cloak from a peg, his best, and then threw it back on the peg, because a smith goes to his work without frill. He grabbed a chain instead. You have the oil? On them and under them. Where's Marsh? Counting somewhere. Gren did not mean it cruelly, but the words did not forgive it either. Might be a job needs both eyes, Noy said, and his voice was kind even when it should not have been. You tell Marsh they'll try the tunnel and they'll try the tower and they'll try whatever looks foolish enough to be neglected, and that last is where you put your second strongest man. Who's the first? Gren blurted, unsure he meant to ask it. Me, tonight, Noy said. And it would be good to have a door to die in, if the dying is needed. He clapped Gren's shoulder with the flat of the chain and made the boy wince and stand straighter. Tell Snow not to be a hero until I'm gone, or I'll come back and break his other hand. Gren stared and then grinned and then tore out into the cold again. And the smith turned his face to the passage where breath becomes mist and mist becomes something that might never be breath again. And he went. When the mammoths hit for the 5th time, the timbers in the gate tunnel screamed. John felt the sound in the long bones of his legs. He knew wood well enough to know there's a kind of noise it makes just before it wins, and a kind it makes just before it tears. He could not tell which this was, and the not knowing ate at him with neat small teeth. The Weeper's men suddenly ran forward with poles that had hooks on them, and they snagged the burning barrels and hauled, and one came up and burst open in a spatter of hot black that made 3 men into flailing dark angels for a heartbeat, and then into nothing but men rolling and shrieking, and then being still. The next barrel came up too, and they dumped snow upon it and smothered the thing like an angry child being sat upon. The mammoth surged again. Something choked. The sound that followed was part old world and part newborn howling, and John understood it as failure and relief at once. The outer timbers had given, but the tunnel had not caved. He saw a giant step into the mouth of the passage and lower his great head, as if putting it into a stable door. Then the giant brought forward the ram. The ram was not a tree trunk. John had seen tree trunks used and understood them. The ram was a thing the giants had made with care and patience, as if for a wedding. It was layered in rawhide and shod in iron, and spikes jutted from its head like the thorns on some grotesque berry. And men under it were shielded by plates of boiled leather set like fish scales. The giant cried something in a voice so deep it made the wall shiver, and the men under the frame stepped as one, and then the ram struck the inner gate. "Get Noy," John said, and then he heard the first clang of chain below and knew Donal Noy was already there, cursing the iron because iron never did what you asked of it the first time. The gate had 3 portcullises spaced through the passageway, like the slow syllables of a name, and John could picture the smith at the winch, teeth set, pulling up the second while the first held, and then letting it fall, staggering the obstruction, the way a good fighter staggers tools, so that he always has a hand's breadth more than he looks like he has. He imagined the shadows moving in that tunnel, the warmth, the noise, the little chips of ice knocked loose with each impact making stars as they flew through torchlight. "Send 2 to the stair," John said. "Watch for climbers." Satin moved like a dancer at that, glad to be away from the broken music of the ram. On the third strike, the inner gate did not splinter. Something worse happened. It gave by a finger's breadth, and then set itself again. And in the moment of that giving, the men under the ram laughed the way men laugh when a stubborn animal finally shifts its weight from wrong leg to right. Laughter is contagious. Even the giant's teeth flashed. "Archers," John said. And they poured more black birds down into that mouth, and some lodged in leather, and some pierced men's cheeks and tongues and eyes. And they fell and were replaced because this was the hour men had decided upon, and they were not going to shame themselves with a change of mind. The ram struck again, and this time a piece of something heavy gave way with a sound like a tooth leaving a jaw. And the gate slid in its groove, a hand, 2 hands, and a wind breathed through the tunnel that had not breathed there before. The fire was dying on the timbers above. The oil was gone. Donal Noye lifted the chain and roared to the men on the other end to haul, and they hauled until he felt the old break in his shoulder throb like a drum, and he told the muscles in his back to shut their mouths and work. He had smithied long enough to know when an iron sang in response to effort, and when it sang to warn you of the fool you were being. He could not hear this iron properly for the noise, but in his bones he knew which song it sang. He looked at the boy beside him and wanted to call him a bastard for being young and brave and available to die. He bit down on the word and turned his head toward the long dark where the second portcullis could be glimpsed. The giant took a pace and hit the ram again, and Noye felt the chain jump in his hand. He could stand and die at this mouth and do his duty, or he could give ground and do the duty that came after. Men who call other men cowards never understand the choice between those duties. He spat, because spitting is for deciding, and bellowed to fall back. The ravens woke. They filled the air above the yard like thoughts that had finally remembered their wings. John heard the iron flap of them, the feather thrum, the hoarse conversational croak. Some men looked up, and some did not, because men had their own work. He watched the lanterns swing at the tunnel's mouth as men carried them inward to light what they had to fear, and he willed the world backwards, and it did not step. On the walkway beside him someone was praying very fast in a thin little voice. John did not turn to see who. He kept his eyes on the black of the passage where the great shape moved and moved again, and grew larger, and began to have details, the way a mountain has details when you come too near. When the inner gate fell, it did so like a drunk. It leaned, and then it went, and then it tried to remember dignity on the way down, and failed. The sound it made had 2 parts. One part said wood and iron and weight and old work going to ruin. One part said men. Something under the ram laughed, then stopped. The giant ducked its head, and the men under the frame surged forward. And then they were within Castle Blackskin. The tunnel spat them out like a mouth spits blood. Donal Noye stepped forward with his chain wrapped around his forearm twice, and the hammer in the other hand, and he hit the first man in the teeth so hard the man's head twisted nearly all the way around, and pointed somewhere sensible again, only once it had toppled. Then Noye met the giant. There are giants and giants. There are great stupid half-starved things that have forgotten the songs that tie each footstep to the ground's permission. There are old wise ones that could tell you where every stone slept in summer when the snow left the high valleys. The one in the tunnel had a smell like good earth. Its eyes were a color men do not have. Its hair had rime in it, and the beginning of frost flowers. It held the ram the way a butcher holds a carcass. It looked at Donal Noye as if he were part of the work. The men around them fell back by some unspoken understanding, wildlings as disciplined as any garrison, because the body recognizes when 2 other bodies need room to finish their talk. Mag. Someone breathed, awe and warning in it. Mag the Mighty, another voice said, and Donal Noye, who had never seen a king and never wanted to, nodded once to the courtesy of it. Come then, he said almost kindly, like a father who means to show a boy that a tool has two edges, and both of them want respect. The fight was short, and was not. It was short because time does not take too much interest in the way a chain swings, and a huge fist meets it, and the shock goes through a man's shoulder, and makes a noise in his skull he will remember until he dies. It was long because meaning stretched it into long rooms where Noy remembered Robert Baratheon, and the first sword he made for him and the last, and remembered hot iron in summer with the sea just beyond the open whore door, and a boy who was too proud to say his hands hurt, and remembered the weight of choosing who eats when the barrel is low and winter is long. The giant hit him, and the chain held, and the chain did not. Noy hit the giant and the hammer remembered being born, and did its work, and then it broke. The handle with a crack like old knuckles, and Noy's hand laughed and let go because what else could it do? The giant bent as a mountain bends, slowly and with sorrow, and Noy stepped in and set his shoulder under a piece of truth, and lifted, and for a breath was not an old smith, but an idea of a man. Then Mag the Mighty and Donal Noy went down together, and the men shouted once, and then the tunnel breathed again the way it had not since the wall was born. By the time word reached John, it had become 3 different stories, and none of them wrong. The gate was gone. The giant was dead. Donal Noy had died like a king. The truth had parts that hurt more, and parts that hurt less. There was no time to choose. The breach was real. The yard would drink men now, from north and south both. And there would be nothing but the taste of steel in the throat, and the sound of boots sliding in blood. "Hold the walkway," John said. "We cannot let them take the height." As if height were a thing that belonged to them, and not to the sky. Mance Rayder came through the smoke and into the yard, like a man stepping onto a stage he had helped build. He had no crown. He did not need one. The red and black of his cloak made a flare against the winter. His face had the sort of quiet you trust when you do not want to and cannot help it. He had a sword, but it stayed where it was. Tormund came after, laughing as if he had been told a joke too filthy to repeat. The Magnar came and his men were a bronze river. The weepers slid through like a thought you'd rather ignore that keeps coming back. And behind them, the free folk poured and filled and climbed until the wall looked down on a winter-bloomed garden of men and women and children and dogs and wolves and bright eyes and dull axes. "Up," John said. "We hold the heights." It was not enough. He knew it before they had taken a dozen hearts worth of breath. Climbers were already on the ladders, and hooks bit into the ice where men should have been. And along the walkway, the free folk came as they always came, by every path at once. Satin's blade flashed quick as a minnow and cut a hand from a rung. The hand bounced wetly twice and lay still, and the body fell into the dark with no sound as if the dark had been waiting for it. Pip gutted a lean man from the skirling pass who smelled of spruce and laughter. Gren took 3 steps and broke a face with the butt of his spear, and then a 4th step and did it again, because repetition is the soul of surviving. John moved like the cold itself, quick and simple, mouth open to the night, tasting it, letting it tell him where each next breath belonged. He saw Ygritte's hair in a tangle of scalps at a belt, and was glad his feet did not stop. He saw a child with a knife and a bear fur up to her neck, and hoped she lived. He saw a giant's hand reach up and take hold of stone as if it were still soft, and he put 2 arrows into the eye of the man climbing beside that hand, because it was the work in front of him. Somewhere below a bell rang, not to summon but because its rope had been caught on something that moved, and the world was ringing whether the bell had a say or not. John felt the shift when the yard gave up the name Castle Black and took on a different one. It is hard to tell men how that happens. The ground is the same, and the walls do not get higher or lower. But the air changes its mind. The voices invoke the name of some other idea. Owning is a habit. He heard the change like the moment in a song when the key turns and the chorus comes, and you suddenly remember the words you have known all your life without knowing how you knew them. He planted his feet against that change and tried to be a man stubborn enough to make air reconsider. "Snow," Tormund roared, delighted, and was there, big as his name, his beard full of little ice daggers, his eyes kind and dangerous in the same breath. He grinned at the mess of himself and lifted his axe half-heartedly. I'd hug you if I did not trust your sword to spoil my embrace. Torment, John said, breathing hard, keeping his blade low and his eyes on the men behind that laughter. You've a way of coming where you're not invited. I'm always invited, Torment said cheerfully. He turned his head slightly toward the yard where Mance stood, not giving orders so much as being an order that men were happy to follow. He wants to talk. Here, eh? John asked, because talk in a yard full of blood feels like a trick even when it is not. Here, Torment said, before more of yours and mine die to prove what only the dead will care about. John hesitated because he was human. Then he lifted his sword point to shoulder height, turned it so the flat showed, and lowered it. Pip muttered a word he should not have said in front of mothers. Gren made a confused sound like a cow does in a fog. Satin did not say anything, but his mouth went tight. Behind them, men shouted, and the shouting washed around the space where Mance and John faced each other, and did not wash through it. Even battle has sense. Mance looked tired, and not at all frightened. You look cold, he said. I am, John said. You look warm. Kings are, Mance said lightly, and then let the jest go. You hear them, he said, and John did, now that his head had room. The wildlings were not cheering him. They weren't cheering anyone. There was a sound like relief and stubbornness being poured into the same cup. There were children crying because the dark had been too big for too long. There were men with old scars on their cheeks, who kept their faces still, because crying is not for men, except when it is. There was the sound of a gate that had been the wrong gate for too long. Beginning to remember, it could be a different sort of door. They want south, Mance said. Me too. Not for pillage, though some will take it for that, if we do nothing wise. Not to burn, though fire will happen where men try to keep it away. We want south because the north has woken, and has teeth we cannot pull. Your vows are a brick in a wall built against men. My people need a wall built against something else. Bendarawan. You broke ours, John said. He did not care if he sounded like a boy. He said it because it was true, and because truth sometimes is a knife, and sometimes is a hand, and sometimes is both. I did, Mance said, not ashamed, because I could not trust it to you alone. No insult. Men in black have brave bones. But brave bones are not enough when the dead have patience like winter. I could beg. I've begged only once in my life, and I like the taste of it about as well as eating a boot. I would do it if begging were a bridge we could all cross. It isn't. You would keep your oath and send 10,000 brave men into a night that would remember them as a meal. I'll take that oath and twist it into something else that might save more. Mender. You and your twisting, John said. I am a harpist, Mance said. What did you expect of me? Drumming. In the corner of Joan's eye, Maester Aemon moved toward them like slow water. He had a hand on Sam's sleeve, and the boy guided him with awkward gentleness. The old man's blank eyes turned as if they could still find men. He lifted his face and John felt something inside him go still. Aemon did not need sight to make men right. You will kill each other, the old man said into the air, and die in a place where even your names will freeze. Or you will remember that the wall erodes as surely as riverbanks, and sometimes that is a mercy. Dying? You want us to yield, John said. I want you to live, the old man said. I want the living on this side of the ice. All the living, John. Even those who do not know our prayers. There are oaths, John said. Break them in the way that keeps them, Aemon said. And somehow his tired voice made sense of that. You swore to hold this wall against that which would end the realms of men. Whom do you protect when you let men die north of it, because your promise has become a cage? Mance was quiet and respectful. The silence around them shifted again. The free folk knew old men who could make words into bread. The Black Brothers had learned from this one how to soften iron into something like kindness without making it weak. John looked at the yard. He saw, as if he stood one step away from his own body, how it would go if he said no. He would fight and kill, and be killed or not. And in a week there would be a story told in the mess halls of the Greenlands about how Castle Black fell for a night and rose in a dawn of red, and the story would be used by men to sell wine and by other men to recruit frightened boys whose mothers were tired. If he said yes, there was a different story, one that did not end anymore certainly, but contained more doors. He had been a boy who thought the world had two choices, and a man who learned it had three. He lifted his sword, turned it again, and slid it back into its scabbard. Terms, he said, because there must be terms. Men like terms. The brothers live. The wall is held. No going south for pillage. Ben-Bani. Mance nodded. The brothers live. The wall is held. No going south for pillage. We go through in companies with children first and mothers and fathers next. You keep your watch in name. We keep it in fact. And who commands? Bowen Marsh said from somewhere. Sharp with the kind of fear that turns to anger because anger gives a man something to do with his hands. He had a sword, and he looked smaller with it. Mance took a breath and spoke mildly. The wall commands, he said. It has done so for 8,000 years. You were only ever its voices. Now there are more mouths. Bowen Marsh's face went red, and then white, and then a weary color like ash. He looked at John as if he were looking for someone else. He looked at Eamon and flinched, because blind eyes are merciless. He put up his sword. It looked like surrender, and perhaps it was. Sometimes surrender is the only way to keep faith. It was daylight before the yard emptied of cries. The sky came down toward them in a gray so thin it might have been smoke from a far-off hearth. The ravens settled and looked at one another, with the pure disapproval of creatures who have survived by considering themselves above all this. The corpses were moved to the side, and the snow around them melted into small red lakes that froze at the edges and made an ugly halo. Dalla came to the yard, white-faced with peace and pregnancy, and the men made a lane she did not see. Val walked beside her, ready to be a blade if air turned suddenly into something that needed cutting. Dalla put her hand on Mance's cheek and stood that way a long while. Whatever passed between them did not belong to the yard, and could not be overheard even by those who stood nearest. John worked until his hands were wood. He fetched water and gave orders, and broke up a fight between a then boy with bone in his ear and a lanky lad from Mole's Town, who had learned to scowl the way other boys learned to whittle. He took an arrow from a woman's shoulder and told her to bite on this, and then she bit on his wrist instead, and did not let go until the arrow was out, and then she kissed the bruise with a strange little courtesy. He told Pip to sleep, and Pip grinned, and slept standing up and then fell and slept lying down. Satin sang, and men who would have laughed at him any other night cried at the tune and did not know why. Gren fell asleep with his back against a post and his spear upright, and his eyes open like a miracle. Bowen Marsh counted, and his lips moved, and no numbers came out, and John forgave him that. When the day had a name, and that name was simply day, Mance Rayder stood in the great common hall and spoke words that made a new shape in the air. He did not sit in the Lord Commander's chair. He did not stand where a Lord Commander would stand. He leaned against a beam with the red silk of his cloak, catching the firelight in small private blazes, and he told men about stones. He said the wall had 100,000 names and only one job. He said the dead were walking farther and more boldly than any of them liked to admit. He said the true north did not begin at this ice but beyond it, where men had never belonged. He said he would hold the wall with every hand that could hold anything. He said the gates would open, and the people would go through, and then they would close again, and stay closed, and be guarded by more than blackened vows. Be guarded by need. And who forces this? The Magnar said. It was not a challenge. It was a line in a forge about to take a different shape. Mance smiled that little smile of a man who knows his own vanity and forgives it twice, and then never again. I do, he said, because you asked me to wear a crown and I told you I wouldn't, and then I did anyway. And that makes me a liar, and liars must pay something back. I pay with the only coin I have ever had. Orders. The free folk laughed at that, a rough scatter like thrown pebbles. The Black Brothers did not laugh. They listened because they were learning a new tongue that used old words. Maester Eamon raised a thin hand. And when the South answers? He asked. For it will. It always does. Kings do not like neighbors who open and close gates for themselves. Then we talk, Mance said. And if talk fails, we do what men do after talk fails. But it will not fail at once. Men who are busy in their own wars, like to pretend new problems do not exist. We will be courteous. We will send a man they can trust, and a man they cannot ignore. Nandens. His eyes went to John. John felt it like a thrown rope. He wanted to step aside and let it go past him. He did not. He went to it and took it in his hands because he recognized the knot, and because it had his name tied into it, and because this was the hour where you chose which part of your oath you were going to break in order to keep the rest. I'll go, he said. Bowen Marsh made a noise that was less a word than the idea of a word. He did not dare speak in the presence of the blind old man. Mance's gaze was amused and sorrowful both. Good lad, he said softly, which John would have hated from any other mouth. Tormund nodded, because Tormund did everything with his whole head. Val tilted her face as if she were smelling something invisible and approved. Dallas smiled and looked tired. You will carry south honesty, Maester Aemon said. And a warning. And a threat, Mance added mildly. Hate to leave it out. Men hear better when they think you have stones in your pocket. Tell them to send what garrisons they'll spare, John said before he knew he had decided to speak. Tell them we are holding a river in flood with hands and pails, and that even kings drown when they think their boots can keep them dry. Tell them there is no glory in dying stupidly, and there will be no songs for men who held a castle and let a world go. Now, Mance tilted his head. You talk like a man I would have liked to be, he said. I talk like a man who would rather not die on a plank tomorrow, John said flatly. Better, Mance said, pleased. The days that followed were the work of 10 winters crammed into the sleeve of one. The gates were made to open in a way they had not in years. The hinges remembered their use with complaint, and men who were good with grease and patience and curses made them relearn. The first companies who passed through were children with their mothers, birds of so many feathers, even the ravens shut up and watched. They clung to their mothers with gloved hands and with eyes, and with that part of the soul that knows where warmth lies. Some looked up at the wall and laughed. Some cried. Some stuck out their tongue to catch snow, and it made them sneeze, as it makes all sensible creatures sneeze. They went south and made their own weather as they went. Behind them came men with their lives on their backs, their wives, their tools, their old women, and their young men, and their dogs, that did not want to go, and then did when someone named them. The thens went with them, and hated the way the snow squeaked there, and the Hornfoots went with them and hated that they could not feel the earth properly through leather. And the Ice River folk went with them, and told each other stories about the way the south would smell. The Black Brothers stood in 2s and 4s, with spears not quite leveled, and faces not quite friendly, and made a thin wall that was not meant to keep anyone out. It was meant to teach them how to make their faces into something people could trust, a feat almost as hard as learning to shoot a bow left-handed. At night, the braziers burned in the yard, and the sky hung low, as if the stars had decided to come nearer for warmth. There were arguments. There were fights. A boy was caught stealing bread, and a girl was caught stealing a kiss, and both crimes were weighed in the same hand and set down. There were weddings because people are fools and delight in that folly most in the worst times. There were births because bodies do not stop their work because of fear. There was the smell of onions. There was laughter that slowly forgot it was an act. There was crying in bed where no one could see because the ground had changed its name, and men felt suddenly that their own did not fit as well as before. John dreamed of cold that was not weather. He woke to Val watching him once with those cool eyes that missed nothing. He dreamed of Ygritte in a place where caves had voices that sang to men and asked them to set down their swords. He woke and went to the gate and oversaw the passage of a company of women from the Milkwater whose cheekbones made you think of mountains, and he thought perhaps the land had faces and he needed to learn them. On the 5th night, a shadow passed over the camp that was not cloud, and not beast, and not the speed of an owl. Varamir shivered in his furs, and cursed without knowing why. 2 hounds knelt and whimpered, and would not be laughed out of it. On the 6th day, a man came in from a scouting line with frost on his beard that would not melt. He set his hand to the brazier, and it smoked like meat. He smiled at John in a way that hurt, and said nothing, and died in a way that made no sound. His eyes stayed open until Aemon put his fingers over them and told them to be gentle. On the 7th morning the snow lay different, like a field after a hard plowing, the surface broken into long pale ribs. Men stepped into the grooves and found they were colder there than they had any right to be in sunlight. Mance called John and Tormund and Val, and the Magnar, and the Weeper, and Varamir, and Aemon himself, who came with Sam's arm to lead him, and they stood in the common hall with the fire being suddenly insufficient. "The world is making a story of us," Mance said. "I'd rather we wrote it." "Then use more ink," Val said. Mance smiled without warmth. "John goes south tomorrow," he said. "He will take 4 men and 2 women and a story in his mouth and a horn in his bag." "The horn," Tormund said, pleased, "makes men listen." "It makes them hear," Mance corrected. "Listening is their business. Blow it once for show if they need persuading. Not twice. Twice is for the thing it was born to do." "Man." "It's so. And what thing is that?" Bowen Marsh asked, before forgetting he was not invited. "To remind ice of its bargain with water," Mance said. "Let's hope we never learn whether the story I bought in the Frostfangs was worth the price." John watched the horn. He had seen it before, had mocked it in his mind as a piece of stage work. It lay on the table in its wrappings like something asleep. It had marks upon it that were not letters and not scratches, and if you looked at them too long, you grew thirsty. He did not want to blow it at all. He did not want to take it south. He did not want to be the man he had become. He put his hand on the table and felt the grain of wood under his palm, and was grateful for that. He said he would go at dawn because men like to name a time and know they can hold to it until it slides away of its own accord. That night, he walked the top of the wall again, alone. The stars had come down farther for warmth and were bright and miserable. He put his hand on the Merlin and felt the cold through the glove, and remembered the first time he had climbed here as a boy who wanted very much to be a man, simply because he thought men suffered more honorably than boys. He watched the tree line. He watched the nothings move through the nothing. He thought of Winterfell, and a father who was not his father, and a brother who ran with wolves, and a sister who had been a child, and was now a rumor. He thought of a woman whose hair had been a problem for his hands, and a woman whose hair was a statement by itself, white as fresh linen. He thought of vows and their edges. Sometime toward morning, when the world is most unsure whether to keep being night or to give it up, he saw lights in the forest that moved with purpose and did not flicker the way torches do. He did not bother to make sense of them. He went and fetched Mance Rayder, who stood in the yard in his cloak, and did not say, "Why bother me with shadows on a night full of shadows?" He looked where John pointed and nodded once, and did not pretend not to be afraid. "They're walking in numbers," Mance said, "and coming closer, not because they are bold, but because we are loud." "They would have come anyway," John said. "They would," Mance agreed, "but now they come faster." He clapped John's shoulder once, hard enough to make Bone think about it. "Go south," he said. "Find men whose wars are less important than their lives. Make them believe. You are your father's son, even if fathers and sons are a riddle meant to mislead. You have a voice that does not sound like begging. Use it." He tilted his head and looked at John as if he were a piece he'd carved in secret. "If they do not listen," he added without ornament, "we will hold here with what we have, and die if the world insists." "You'll hold," John said. He did not know if he believed it, but some words need saying just to train the air. Mance's mouth made that little almost smile. "We'll try," he said. And sometimes that is what men can say, and not be liars. They stood together on the wall, the former brother and the king without a crown, and listened as the ice sang its old songs. The sound was not like creaking ship timbers now. It was more like glass being played by a wet finger, pure and fretful. Far below, in the patient dark of the haunted forest, something smiled without moving its mouth. When dawn finally remembered them, it came up raw and thin. John stood in the yard with the 4 men and 2 women who would go with him. Saddened because he could find a tune in a room full of screaming. Gren, because he did not know how to stop being loyal. A woman called Wraith from the Free Folk, light as a thought and twice as quick. A Then whose name had too many consonants and who did not care if Southerners were offended when he pronounced it properly. A doorman from the shadow, Totterer with a scar like a misplaced. Sam cried and tried to stop, and then cried anyway, and then laughed at himself, and then cried again because laughter and tears are kin. Eamon put his hand on John's cheek and felt the shape of him and nodded and said nothing because words would have been too heavy. Bowen Marsh wanted to say something and could not find it, and so found a hand to shake instead, and committed that cowardice and courage at once. Mance gave John the horn and did not take his hand back too quickly. "Go," he said. "Find a king and tell him what it is to be one." John took the horn and slung it. He took Longclaw. He took the road not because it was the obvious one, but because the snow had made choices for him, and this was the one left. They went out the south gate, and the air outside felt immediately different, as if he had stepped into a room where the same words had a different meaning. Men watched from the trees and pretended not to. The sky opened above them like a wound, and then remembered it had a scab, and shut. Behind him the wall stood, not as fortress but as a god that had been reminded of its job after a long lapse, and was considering how best to do it this time. On its northern face, men and giants, and women with knives and children, with loud lungs and old blind maesters, and petty officers, with good hearts and bigger appetites, moved like ants upon a loaf. They sorted grain from stone, and made their little boundaries, and their little brave choices. On its southern face, 6 people walked into a country that thought winter was a way to complain about wind, and who soon would learn it was a habit of mind. Above and behind and beyond all of it, something old drew in a breath. And south, far away where kings sat at long tables, winter's first knock sounded upon doors that had never been opened to it. Ka, ka, jindi, ka. They made the first miles on the old road that ran south like a half-forgotten scar through the gift. Low walls tumbled to gray knuckles under snow. Orchard rows that were no longer rows but gestures. Hedges overrun by brush and briar that should not have had so much life in winter. The wind came at their backs, and the drifts lay cut by its work into smooth ribs that took their footprints sharply, and then slurred them when the gusts changed mind. John set the pace without naming it. He did not walk like a man who wanted to hurry, or a man who thought delay would save him. He walked like a man who had a job and a body that would do it, and a day that was stingy with light. Gren trudged with his spear in his fist and his breath whistling. He did not complain. Satin moved lightly for all his layers and left prints like commas, the sort of marks that made a page easier to read. The Then strode with a grave care, his bronze gleaming dull, the tattoo on his temple like a sentence written in a language John did not speak. The Shadow Tower man had a habit of looking back every 50 steps, and then straightening his cloak, as if he had seen something he did not approve of, and might get the chance to fix later. His scar pulled when he frowned, and gave his frown a second frown to go with it. Wraith, the woman from the frost ridges, neither trudged nor strode. She slipped. She had a way of not being in the place you thought she was when you looked again. Val walked at John's shoulder when the mood took her, and ahead when it didn't, and behind when it was wise, and she carried the long-hafted knife of her people, as if it had always belonged to her, and always would. They ate while walking, hard rye wafers that broke into crumbs with a smell like mouse beds, smoked fish in strips that left the tongue feeling skinned, 2 apples found in a cellar where the frost had been bribed with straw and failed. They drank snow, and pretended it was the same as water. At mid-morning they passed a field where someone had tried the last year to plant barley, and the winter had laughed and kept the seed. John slowed without meaning to. He knew that field without having seen it, knew the feel of barley heads underhand, the sting they left on wrists, the grim satisfaction of a harvest that would keep men alive when wolves got brave and the rivers forgot how to be liquid. He had not grown that kind of field, but he had grown into a house that had, and the memory sits in you, whether you asked for it or not. They found the first farm at noon, built of stone that had believed itself permanent, and a roof of thatch gone gray as the sky. A shutter hung by one leather hinge and banged as the wind desired. A sled lay turned upside down near the door. On it Snow had built a little hill with patient malice. John put up a hand and the others fanned without thinking, learned habits making geometry in the snow. A shallow curve. A flanking pair. A reserve. He went to the door. The iron latch was slick with a clear glaze. He lifted it and pushed, and the door yielded like old men do, slow and noisy and dignified. Inside, it smelled of ash and brine, and the cold you keep when you cannot afford to get rid of all of it. A fish rack stood near the hearth with only bones on it, clean as song. The bed was a depression in straw with a shape in it that could have been a man if men turned to shadow instead of dirt. Val went to the corner and crouched, and took up a small carved object and turned it. It was a whale in soft wood, smoothed by much touching, the eye a bead. She put it down the way you put down a sleeping infant who is not yours. Gone 3 days. Wraith murmured. She had a way of knowing time by the weight of it. Took the best fishing lines, left this. She lifted a coil of hemp that looked good, until she put her thumb into it, and the fibers parted like a bad marriage. Left the pig, she added, and pointed with her chin. The pig had been there when the snow came. It had not learned how to leave. John stood and listened. Houses talk, if you give them silence. This one said, "We tried to keep our place," and the season said, "You do not have a place. You have my permission, and I withdraw it." He moved back into the day. They saw the people in the mid-afternoon. Not many. 5 figures on the road ahead. 2 small, one leaning hard on a pole. One carrying a bundle that had elbows. One who walked with the look of a man who had been born in motion. When the 5 saw them, they wavered in that peculiar way where the body considers 10 options at once, and then never chooses any, and stands there stupidly. John lifted his hands, palms out. A pantomime men everywhere know. "We're black," he called. The words went out and came back smaller. "Night's watch. We don't want your food. We want news. Menno." And he. At once the group organized itself. The man with the long gait stepped a hair ahead. The one with the pole steadied. The bundle turned its face up under the cloth and revealed a girl with cheeks burned by wind. The smallest looked as if it were ready to bolt, and did not. They were fisherfolk from the look of them, with the deep cracked hands and the nets knotted into everything they wore. Even their belts, even their hair. Their eyes had that guarded brightness you see in dogs you mean to be kind to. "News," the man said, Wary's cousin in his voice. "I'll tell you a thing you know. It's cold. It gets colder. There's light in the forest at night that does not come from men." "Da." John nodded once, because making a man repeat what frightens him is a cruelty you only commit if you need to know how broken he is. "Ships," he said instead. "Have you seen ships along the bay?" The man's face did a slow thing like thaw, then froze again. "White sails," he said grudgingly. "Not little men. Not ours. East, days ago. Might have gone up the coast. Might have turned back. Might be ghosts. Nenderall. White sails," Val said thoughtfully, tasting the shape. "Not the cat of brine men." She meant the Lyseni. "Not the heavy ships of the free cities, white as winter. That's a southerner's vanity. He wants to be seen." Satin had the same thought. "Eastwatch," he said. "If someone was fool enough to bring a fleet to these waters, they'd put their nose in Eastwatch first to make sure they weren't kissing rocks." John felt the decision go through him like a blade. South by the King's Road would take them into nobody's arms in time. East meant a chance at men who could call themselves king with the word stuck to their teeth and not drop it. "East," he said. "We go east. If there are ships, they can carry word faster than my boots." The fisher looked as if he wanted to argue simply because men liked to, then thought better. "Keep the shoreline to your left," he advised. "Don't trust the ice where it looks trustworthy. It never is." "Are you coming into the wall?" John asked. "The gates are open, in order. Children first." "Bow." The man lifted his chin, and John saw a tendon jump. "Pride is a stubborn friend. Will come when the nets can't find water," he said. A man who leaves his boat, leaves his blood. But thank you for the telling. If those white sails are not ghosts, they'll have ghosts aboard before they're done up here. Nay. They parted there in the pale slanting light that makes men kinder or more cruel. John watched the five go until they were part of the land. He turned his feet east, and the others turned theirs, and the world under them changed. The trees thinned, and then became stumps, and then became scrub, and the smell of salt began to lay its hand upon the air. Not strong yet, but honest. In the dusk, when the sky took on a greenish cast, men from the south call witchlight, and men from the north understand, is only the sky remembering its youth. They made a camp in the lee of a low hill, where stones had put themselves into a ring as if they had once been a wall, and had gotten tired and sat down. They built no fire. There is a kind of cold you can cheat. This was not it. When the dark was complete and lay over them with the weight of a hand, Wraith nudged John with the edge of her knife. She did not prod like a woman who needed to be listened to. She simply included him in what she had already decided to know. He lifted his head from his cloak and made the sound a man makes when he pretends he was not asleep. There. She breathed. He listened as she listened, with eyes first, and then the part of you that listens through the bones of your face. It was not a step. It was something like a brush's whisper. The hairs on his forearm rose one by one as if a little hand went down them. He put his fingers on Val's wrist, and she was already awake, her knife's edge against her knuckles to warn her fingers not to do something foolish with it. Gren did not move, and yet the line of his jaw changed. Satin's breath slowed. The then looked as if he were carved, and the carving had been done by someone who admired straight lines. The Shadow Tower man drew a breath through his nose and let it out silent. John slid Longclaw free. You do not teach a sword to be quiet. You teach yourself to move as if the sword were part of your arm, and had never scraped a scabbard in its life. He raised his head a hair, and saw what Wraith had seen. Not one thing, but wrongness. The night had a pattern even to the untrained. The wrongness sat in it the way a stain sits in a cloth. A shadow moved across a deeper shadow, and had no weight. Then another. The first of them came into the ring of stones, and he understood why the sound had been wrong. The feet were wrong. The steps were remembered, as if the legs had learned long ago how to walk, and now were performing walking rather than doing it. The jackdaw that sat on the stone to John's left cocked its head, eye bright, and then about-faced with an intelligent contempt, and flew into the dark without a sound. John stood into the thing the way you step into a wave, quickly, shoulders set, mouth shut. The sword lifted and fell. The head rolled off the thing without much fuss. The mouth stayed open, and the teeth looked patient, and the body went on moving for the length of a heartbeat twice, and then decided to be done. The second came from his left, and he pivoted, and Val moved with him, because she had learned him without asking permission. Her knife took the tendon in the back of its ankle, and it dropped, as if it had reconsidered the ground. John put the sword through the place where rib and spine make a marriage, and tore down. It stank like secrets left too long in a cellar. The then spoke a word in his bronze voice, and drove his spear through one, and then 3 times more, as if the act itself required accounting. Satin went low when something grabbed for his hair, and he slid under its hands, and cut with his short blade, and made a line where no line had needed to be, and then another where the first begged for a friend. Gren bellowed once, and then remembered you do not call for a mother who cannot hear you, and killed without drama. Wraith's work was quiet, and the knife was an argument the white could not answer. When it was over, there was a long thin moment where the air tried to decide whether to let them hear anything but their own blood. John felt the horn at his back as if it had woken. He did not reach for it. He counted them. He counted his own. All accounted for. The Shadow Tower man had a line of red across his cheek where something had cut him with a hand. Simply by squeezing hard, it would scar. He looked pleased in a vicious way, and then ashamed of his pleasure, and then relieved that he was not ashamed. He wiped it with the back of his hand, and the blood made a bright coin there until the cold told it what to be. Fire, Val whispered. It will bring eyes, the Shadow Tower man said. It will bring less of these, Val returned. Your choice. John chose. They made a low fire and kept it low and mean, a miser's flame. But it was flame, and that matters. The bodies around the stones moved twice, and that was all. Something of them had not been invited to stay. The smoke made a line straight up into the cold and seemed to freeze into an idea and hang there. John watched it longer than he should have, and then put his back to a stone and closed one eye, and then the other, and the hours went down like bad bread. They saw the sea at noon. A band of gray that lay like a sword on the horizon, and then grew, and then resolved into a surface that was not a surface, in motion and not moving. The smell of it came, and the taste came with it, whether you opened your mouth or not. The sky bent down farther, and the wind brought the noise of water striking land in a rhythm that went beyond ears. They made for a low promontory where old men had told young men long ago that you could see farther, and climbed it because men still believe that. Sails lay on the sea as if someone had spilled a bag of teeth. White, as the fisher had said. White even in this light. They were not Liceni with their gaudy tastes and paints. They were not the brine cats with their carved prows and swagger. These had a plainness that was a different sort of brag. There was order in them. John counted, and then counted again. The number seemed wrong because it did not fit what he had expected. And then it became right, because what you expect is always a liar. Southron warships, the Shadow Tower man said. And there was something like hunger in his voice. He had served on the sea before they had put black on his back, perhaps. Or perhaps he simply wanted a different enemy for an hour. Those are not Lannis sails. Satin murmured, squinting. They're too clean to be ironborn, Gren said, and then blushed as if he had said something clever in front of a girl. Val shaded her eyes with a hand as if that would do anything against the glare off the water. They hide their colors, she said. Or they have none. Only men who are certain do that. Or men who are afraid. Stannis Baratheon, John said quietly. Saying the name settled half a dozen tumbling thoughts. Dragonstone had white sails. Stannis is a man who paints his ships like teeth. Plain, hard teeth. Nando. And who would not hate winter enough to come here? Satin said softly. A man who hates most things. Or loves one thing enough, Val offered. Law, John said. He had never met the man, and yet he had a sense of him, as you have a sense of a coming storm, by what it does to birds. Then he must set a new law here, Val said without scorn. Or die by the old. They made the last miles to Eastwatch with the wind making a scouring broom of itself. The fortress hunched at the edge of the world where land gets shy and the sea gets bold. It looked like a man who has walked too far. Shoulders up around his ears. Eyes narrowed against sand blown off frozen waves. A watchfire burned on the seaward tower, and a line of men stood on the wall, in furs gone greasy at the cuffs. When they saw the 6 figures on the road, their posture changed in a dozen small ways. Ways that say ready and wish we were readier. A horn called. Not a challenge. A notification. Doors scraped, and winches began a slow song. The outer gate rolled enough to let men out, and they came out with their spears half forward. Cotter Pike came with them because Cotter Pike always came with them. Men who have lived too long on the edge of a thing do not trust anything they do not touch. He was shorter than John remembered from the one time he had seen him at Castle Black before the Fist, with a face that looked as if it had been chiseled by someone in a hurry and hands that had learned boats before swords. His beard was colorless, and his eyes were the color of old rope. You took your time, he said, without greeting. I figured if you were dead, you'd be dead nearer. It's less walking if a man dies close up. Then? We were making sure we were worth the walk, John said dryly. Cotter's gaze went to the horn strap across Joan's chest, and to Val, and to the then, and to Wraith, and he made little marks in his head that did not add to numbers he liked. You've brought me a problem, he said. I have no room for problems. The sea gives me enough. Messimn. I brought you a choice, John said. Problems and choices sometimes wear each other's cloaks. Cotter made a face, and then looked to the sea, and the sails, and back at John. You'll have your choice soon enough, he said curtly. That's a king's fleet or a fool's, and I don't care which so long as they have salt beef to sell and men to stand watch while mine sleep. In with you. If I have to explain at the water's edge why I let wildlings into my yard, I'd rather be warm while I lie. Now. They went within, and the smell of tar and fish guts and iron all mixed hit them and felt almost like bread. The yard of Eastwatch was a careful chaos. Coils of rope hung like sleeping snakes, boats upturned and scraped and smeared with pitch, barrels stacked like men in good order, except barrel men cannot run, braziers that had forgotten their job and were put in mind of it. Men with the look of the sea about them glanced, and then glanced again, and then decided not to see Val, because they did not know how to behave toward her, and men dislike not knowing. The wind had a different voice here. It had learned sailors' curses, and swore almost musically. Cotter took them into the commander's hall, which was more like a ship's great cabin that had been mislaid inside a fort. Low beamed, crowded with maps and pieces of wood shaped like things that float, and a rack of weathered spears that might have been useful when a whale came too near. He waved a hand at the hearth, and the fire therein showed too much enthusiasm, as if eager to prove it belonged in a place men did not associate with comfort. Speak, Cotter said, and speak fast. The sea's doing something clever, and I've not the patience to flatter it by watching too long. John spoke. He told him what he had seen in the forest, and on the wall, and in the yard where men had decided to stop saying no to each other. He told him Mance's terms, not as a seller, but as a man who had put them in his mouth and tested the edges and found them sharp but usable. He said the words Maester Aemon had said about oaths kept by breaking, and Cotter's mouth tightened as if he had bitten a fishbone. And you want me to swallow that? Cotter said. I want you to live to argue about it, John returned. If that's swallowing, call it that. There won't be much to spit if you wait. Cotter stared as if waiting for the face in the flames to speak sense. The flames spoke, only flame. He spat neatly into the corner, a mariner's habit, governed by invisible rules of propriety, and looked up when a horn on the walls called a pattern that was different from challenge, and different from alarm, and far too steady to be accident. The sailors in the hall stiffened in that lovely, efficient way that makes men who do not love them envy them in secret. They're coming in, Cotter said. The corners of his mouth twisted into something that might have been a smile, if it had a mother. Let's see if kings still know their starboard from their arse. They went to the seaward wall and watched the fleet stand in. It was well done. Whoever commanded had their ships in hand, lines smooth, gaps right where gulls could carry messages if gulls cared for human tricks. The lead ship stood out from the others, the way a man stands out by virtue of how still he is rather than any finery. The banner at its mast came late to sight, snapping and then steadying in the onshore wind. A crowned stag, black against gold so pale it had nearly died on the cloth, and beneath it another device, smaller, that carried a red stain that was not blood but like to be mistaken for it. Baratheon. Satin breathed. The word had weight. It was not a prayer, but it borrowed a prayer's postures. They'll want us to know they can land at need, Cotter said almost thoughtfully. They'll want to shock us with their suddenness and reassure us with their order. Men do that when they aren't sure they can manage both. Will they talk? Val asked. They'll talk until talking forgets it isn't fighting, Cotter said. And then we'll see. When the first launches came in off the flagship, they were rowed by men who had learned in a better climate and had unlearned their laziness here. When they grounded, the men sprang out and made a shape of spears and left a lane. Stannis Baratheon came up that lane as if the shore had been built for him. He was a man who looked like a blade that had seen too much use and had been ground too many times. Thin of face and unyielding of eye, with a mouth set in a way that made a man think of locks. He wore no crown. He did not need one. The stag on his breastplate had been battered and repaired. The antlers looked as if they would cut anything that came near. Beside him came a man with a face like a winter apple and hands with the sea written on them in scars. Davos Seaworth. And a woman like fire and shadow, hair the color of a warning, with red at her throat that caught the eye and held it. Melisandre of Ashai. Cotter Pike went down to the yard to meet them because he had to, cursing under his breath like a litany. John hung back only a little, not because he wished to hide, but because he wanted to watch these men enter the cold. Val stood beside him because she does not look at kings from behind. Stannis did not waste time on admiration. He glanced once at the sea tower, once at the wall, once at the boats being drawn up. And then his eyes went to Cotter as if he had been told to expect a man, and found only this man, and would make do. He took the measure, and then did not throw it away. "Commander," he said, his voice like a file on rust, "your warning fires speak in time. I require an account of the wall and of Castle Black. And see." Cotter Pike bowed the way a man bows when he has carried a sack of stones all day and is asked to carry one more. "Your Grace," he said, souring the courtesy slightly, "the wall is intact where it stands and broken where it is broken. Castle Black is held by men who did not hold it last week." Stannis' gaze was a blade. "Say," he demanded. Cotter jerked his chin up toward where Jon stood, because Cotter Pike did not mind putting a boy in the mouth of a king so long as the boy did not crack. "Ask him," he said. "He went through it. He's the kind for explanations." The king's eyes found Jon as if they had been told to find him years ago. Jon had the oddest sensation that Stannis was disappointed he had not died already, and would forgive him if he made up for it promptly. The king climbed the steps like a man who hated steps for reminding him of stairs he had not climbed in other castles, and stood before Jon and looked down the line of him, and saw the horn and the sword, and the black and the face. "Name yourself," Stannis said. "Jon Snow, your grace." He did not stumble over the bastard's name. Let a king have the truth first. Stannis' mouth twitched infinitesimally, which in another man would have been a broad smile. "Eddard Stark's bastard," he said in the tone of a bookmaker reading odds. "You are of the Watch." "I am," Jon said. "And yet you stand beside a wildling," Stannis said, glancing at Val and making the word neither insult nor kindness. "And you wear something that looks like a toy and like a threat." His eyes went to the horn strap and back. Jon took in breath and out. "Mance Rayder has the wall," he said. "And if I had the breath to make a joke of it, I would not, because we have lost too much laughter. He has the wall, and he keeps it. He opens the gate to pass the people through, and he shuts it, and he will hold it with every hand there is. He will fight the dead for it. He asks to be allowed to do it without having to fight you as well. Then, there are men who argue with the first words they hear." Stannis Baratheon listened all the way to the end, and then opened his mouth like a man opening a heavy chest. "He took the wall from the Watch," he said. "It is treason." "It is necessity," Jon said, and felt the heat of Melisandre's gaze before he saw it. "And if it is treason, it is in service to your law. The law says the wall must stand, and the realm must be defended. Let us hold it, and then you may punish those who held it in a way that offended a book." "And now it's show." Davos Seaworth's mouth did not move, but Jon felt the strange friendly weight of his attention. Stannis' jaw ticked. "You offer me a realm secured by oaths broken for convenience," he said. "I offer you men who will be alive to swear your oaths later," Jon said, and heard, distantly, Maester Aemon's voice in his own. Melisandre's red eyes had the disconcerting quality of seeing a light that was not present in the room. They went to Val, and did not dismiss her, and to Jon, and lingered, and to the horn, and narrowed. "You carry an old lie," she said to Jon, not bothering to seek leave to speak, because people who have seen too much fire take liberties. "It drinks the fear of men and grows fat. It was made for kings and for fools. A horn to summon the end of things is the sort of toy children build when the world frightens them. Yet the runes upon it know a few true words, burned there by hands that did not love men." The horn of Joramun," Davos said under his breath, and the contempt in his voice was for the name, not the idea. "It calls itself whatever men will fear most," the Red Woman said. "There is power in fear. Burn it, and you will burn some of that power away." She smiled then, a little, at Jon's face. "He does not want to burn it." "No," Jon said. "Good," Stannis snapped, surprising them both. "We will not do things because a witch likes how they sound." She took the scolding as a cat takes a slap, remembering it, but not repenting. "We will do many things," she said lightly. "But we will do them because the night presses, not because I find joy in flame." "Your Grace," she added, and bowed more elegantly than the wind deserved. Stannis ignored her tactfully. He fixed Jon in that iron stare again. "You speak for Mance Rayder now?" "I speak for the living," Jon said. "Mance speaks for himself. If you want him at your feet, you will learn you have only your own to stand upon when the cold comes with teeth." "Then so arrogant," Stannis said, as if pronouncing sentence. And yet, he turned to Cotter Pike. "I have come north to obey duty while my lords play games with children's crowns. I will not allow a deserter and oathbreaker to sit a wall that belongs to the realm." Then sit it with him," Cotter said bluntly, causing 3 sailors to look at their feet and try not to smile. "We've not the men to take that gate back, your Grace. Not with giants at their shoulders and the dead walking the snow. You have men. Put them up there among the wildlings and your black crows, and let the wall do what it was built to do. After winter, peel your oathbreaker and make an oath of his skin. Till then, share. Lenderol." Stannis stared at Cotter as if he had discovered a new species of crab. Davos' mouth might have twitched. It might have been the wind. The king turned on his heel like a soldier executing a drill and made for the steps. "We will speak further," he said. "All of you. You," he pointed at Jon, "will tell me everything again, and this time you will tell me what it is you want out of this. A man who gives me only my own needs has something in his pocket. You, woman, all diddle. You will tell me why I should not put you in irons and send you south as a present for my wife. She likes curiosities. And you," he added to Cotter, almost as an afterthought, "will find me a chamber where I can rest that is not full of fish." Cotter bowed low enough to insult a taller man and escorted them in with a barbed civility that would have made a better man smile. Jon watched Stannis go and felt something in him, ease that he had not known was taught. Some men make you feel as if you are standing on a plank with water under it that has not decided whether to be ice. Stannis made you feel as if you stood on an anvil and would be struck whether you cried or prayed. The certainty was a kind of comfort. They gave the 6 a room with a brazier and a window slit that admitted a line of sea light. The brazier hissed at the damp. Satin sat and leaned his head back against the wall with the careless grace of the very tired. Gren set his spear so it would not fall on him in the night, and then looked offended with himself for making such a simple mistake. The then folded his knees and rested his hands in his lap, as if he had been practicing patience all his life in expectation of this exact hour. The Shadow Tower man busied himself with their gear, because if he were not busy, he would think, and he did not like where his thoughts went in stormy weather. Wraith lay down and closed her eyes without ceremony, her knife beneath her cheek. Val stood at the slit of a window and looked at the sea, as if the sea were a man she meant to test later. "Do you trust him?" she asked without turning. "Trust," Jon said. "Trust him to be himself. He'll be that or nothing. Men are least themselves with their own desires," Val said mildly. "And kings have the hungriest desires of all." Jon did not say that kings he had known had never wanted anything so much as they wanted to be seen wanting it. Stannis looked as if he would be content to want in private and get. He unbuckled the horn and laid it upon the ground near the brazier, where the heat made a tremulous line in the air above it. He watched it a while in case it moved. It did not. In the heat, shimmer the runes seemed to ripple, and then they were only lines that men had cut into a shape the world might listen to. When the summons came, it was delivered by a round-faced squire with the nervous, proud look of a boy who has learned his letters late and wants to put them all into every sentence. He said, "Your Grace summons," as if the words were a prayer he did not understand, and then stood there as if waiting for absolution. Jon went, because he had asked for this when he stepped beyond the south gate, and Val went with him because she wanted to see how this Iron Man would set his eyes upon her. They found Stannis in a cabin room that had become a king's for the moment. Maps lay on the table, but unlike the maps at Castle Black, these had little ships carved upon them, and lists of victuals, and a mark for how many oars a boat can hold without rowing itself in circles. Davos stood at one side with his hands clasped, wearing his smuggler's patience like a penance. Melisandre sat by the fire and made the fire behave, her eyes on the red heart at her throat, as if listening to a song no one else could hear. "You will speak," Stannis said, and Jon did. He gave him the yard again, and the giant, and the chain, and Noi. And saying Noi's name aloud in this southern room made something inside him pull tight and then let go. He gave him Mance's words and his own. He gave him Maester Aemon and the old man's seeings and failings and courage. He spoke of the people passing through the gate with their lives in their hands, and of the cold light moving among trees and the way sound can freeze if you are careless with it. "And you want," Stannis said when he had done, unexpectedly soft. The question a bit of wire bent by fingers that had learned to be gentle too late. "To live," Jon said with the bluntness of a man too cold to phrase. "For them to live. For the wall to have enough hands and hearts. For you to put your quarrel with Mance aside until the ice breaks and the dead go back wherever it is they hide. After, fight him. After, hang me if you must. Benderu. I do nothing because I must," Stannis said, and Davos' mouth went tight for a breath, as if he would have liked to disagree and did not. "I do what is lawful. We make our laws and then our laws make us if we're lucky and break us if we're wicked. Winter does not answer to law, nor do men like this Mance Rayder. He is a deserter. Now, he is a king," Val said suddenly, and the room's temperature shifted in that delicate way that happens when men's attention devours and leaves a vacuum. She did not bow or tilt her head, and she did not smile. She spoke as if she were telling a child a thing that would help him. "Who made him a king?" Stannis asked without mockery. "Not gods. Gods do not care for such things. Men do. Who are these men to make kings?" "Men are ruined. Free men," Val said. "Men who do not bend the knee to a man because his father told them to. Men who bend it because he made a camp where they could eat and did not beat their children for crying when the wind hurt them. Men like those make kings." "Even your kind," she added, almost curiously. "You say a man is king because iron said so long ago." "Our iron is hunger and fear and a song we can bear to listen to at night." "Nay?" Stannis regarded her as if she were a blade that had turned out to be two blades at once. "You are insolent," he said. "But you are not wrong." He turned to Davos. "Lord Seaworth." "Your Grace," Davos said, stepping forward into the cold king light. "The wall cares nothing for knees. The storms at sea do not ask a man's name before they take his sail, and the night does not ask if a man has a title before he falls off a dock. The boy speaks well. So does the woman. We need men on that wall. Put ours up there with theirs. Make them swear to hold, not to kneel. Later, kneel them. Nennerwandero." Melisandre's smile was small and infuriating. "Or bend them in fire and they will kneel to warmth," she said softly. Stannis shot her a look, not so much angry as weary. He looked to Jon again, and Jon saw the choice move behind his eyes like a sea beast under gray water. "White Harbor," Stannis said abruptly. "If I put my ships on that wall, I have no sail for the south. Manderley has ships and food. I would have taken his harbor and his oath and turned men north and south with both hands. But this—" He made a small angry gesture as if the air had offended him. "This devours the time. If I stand at your wall, I cannot stand at my throne." "Your Grace," Davos said, and the title turned into kindness in his mouth. "The throne will rot clean without you. It will be a better thing when you sit it if you have saved the world you mean to rule." "Dain." "Pious," Stannis said, and the word was not contempt. He closed his eyes for the length of a breath, opened them, and they were harder than ice. "We will march," he said. "We will stand a garrison at your damned gate. We will see this Mance Rayder and see if his neck is made for rope or iron. If he cannot bend the knee, he can bend the neck. But we will not do it today." "Bendewander." "You'll parley," Jon said, and felt something in him release like a fish shaken free of a hook. "I will judge," Stannis said. "But I will parley before I judge. And if the dead come while we talk, we will stop talking and do what men do while dying. Get out," he added, not unkindly. "Yet. Sleep. But Tell your friends to not steal from my sailors. In the morning we will go up to a gate that does not love me, and you will take me through it." Then, when they were outside and the wind fell upon them again like a welcome enemy, Val let out a breath that might have been laughter and might have been simple survival. "Your kings are interesting," she said. "Men are dull until you put winter in their clothes," John said. They slept like men who had earned it, and yet did not trust it. John woke twice with the horn in his hands without remembering that he had reached for it. He lay in the gray between 1 hour and the next, and listened to the sea's slow, arrogant talk, and the smaller sounds of men trying to unlearn their fear of it. He dreamed of a gate that was not a gate, but a mouth, and teeth made of ice that spoke the law. The law. The law. He woke and laughed at himself, and then he did not. At dawn the fleet sent its boats ashore, and men made lines of baggage like ants with ambitions. The yard filled with men in bright worn mail, whose gods had not come north with them, and in dark wool, whose gods had never left, and in no gods at all but the sea. They formed companies under banners that had seen better weather, and moved like a man putting his armor on. Awkwardly at first, and then with a sort of remembered grace. Davos found John with the ease of a man who had spent his life finding what he needed in a tangle of ropes and barrels, and demand, "You look like Stark, and like someone who has learned not to look like anyone," Davos said conversationally as he tightened the strap on his left gauntlet. "That will serve you as well as a sword up here." "You've never been north of the neck," John said. "I've been farther," Davos said, surprising a laugh out of him. "On the sea, north is a trick. It keeps moving when you look." They went out in a column that did not want to be a column, the horses objecting to the smell of ships and the men objecting to the ground because it was hard in the wrong ways. The path from Eastwatch to the wall runs parallel to the world's edge and thinks itself important for that reason. It saw them coming and tried to soften their boots. It failed. The day was a washing of white light into gray, and then out again. When the wall finally rose up, even these southerners were silenced by it. When a man has lived his life under skies bounded by hills and houses, a thing like that cuts his thought in two. At the foot of the wall, Stannis dismounted and stood with his head back, as if insulting it would do any good. "I do not see how men built it," he said. "They didn't," John said quietly. "The wall built them." Stannis shot him a glance of irritation, which on him looked almost like approval. "Trumpets," he ordered, without raising his voice. They sounded, and the sound ran along the ice to Castle Black, and came back changed. Thinner, colder, but not diminished. The gate opened. Not far, only the way a mouth opens when considering a bite it has not decided to take. Men in black stood within it, and beyond them, men in furs and a big man with bands in his beard, whose laughter died when he saw what came and only crouched there, ready to be born again. Mance Rayder stood a little forward of them all, cloak bright and face calm. He was not surprised. He was a man who had taken the habit of surprise and turned it into an old friend who did not come around much. "Your Grace," he said in a voice that could unpurse a miser. He did not bow. He did not need to. Stannis stood like a man who had been carved into standing. "Mance Rayder," he returned. "You were a brother of the Watch." "I was," Mance said. "And now, I am a brother to the men who died when those in black would not open their doors. The world we swore to protect is north of this arch too. Come inside. We do not parade in the cold like Southrons who fear sweat." None. It could have gone wrong there, on that one word, that one invitation. A king stepping into a yard held by a man who had declared himself a king would be an old tale with an old ending. But Stannis glanced once at John, once at the blades that glittered among furs, once at the stair that led up to the top of the wall, and then he stepped through the arch. "Talk," he said. They went to the common hall, where the roof beams still held smoke in their teeth, and the faces of men had been made comfortable by repetition. Aemon sat not far from the fire with Sam beside him like a tag on Winter's cloak. When Stannis entered, the old man lifted his head and turned his blind eyes and bowed. And the bow of a Targaryen in a black man's hall to a Baratheon in his mail had in it enough history to drown men. Stannis halted a heartbeat as if some animal sense in him had felt a dragon's ghost, and then went on. The talk went as Jon had imagined, and not at all. Stannis demanded oaths. Mance offered duty. Stannis demanded kneeling. Mance offered standing shoulder to shoulder. They both had the truth, and the truth turned its back on both, and refused to be measured. Davos spoke twice, and when he did the talk went from shouting to sentences. Melisandre spoke once and the room got colder. Aemon spoke once and every head bowed without knowing it did. You would have this realm keep faith with a boy's promise to a wall of ice, Aemon said, and the sentence had the weight of a hymn. The promise was always to men, not to things. Make a new promise and keep it. Then Gawain. I will have obedience, Stannis said stubbornly, because men who have spent too long being right become wrong in the same direction for a time. Without obedience, there is only appetite. There is hunger, Mance said, not without pity. And dying. And your banners blowing over nobody. Obedience is a Southron word. We have other words here. Then? Insho. You have death coming, Melisandre said. And the shadows of he who leads it make even kings petty. Bend your neck or your knee. It is all bending. The difference is only the story told about it. You like stories, Mance said, glancing at her red throat and her hotter eyes. I like gates that open. Jon looked at the men around them and saw an answer that was not in any sentence. Black cloaks brushed fur. Bronze touched boiled leather. A boy from Mole's town with a new scar stood beside a then with old ones, and they both had their spears resting in the same careless manner. Tips slanted out, a mirror without agreement. The world was making a shape of them in spite of their kings. Make them freeholders, Jon heard himself say, his voice too loud and thus perfect. They turned. The room, the kings, the old man, the woman with the red thing at her throat. Give them the new gift, he said to Stannis. It's empty and it's hungry. Give them land they can look at and call by a name. Make them hold it for you and for the wall. Make them pay taxes when there are taxes to pay, and bleed when bleeding is needed. If you must have kneeling, have it over seed cakes and in surveyor's books. If you must have fealty, have it to the land. Nah. Stannis stared at him. He disliked being surprised. He disliked it more when the surprise had sense in it. Who are you two? A man who knows that men are held to land more than to banners, Jon said. A bastard who watched a lord look at fields and think of his children. Give them the gift and they'll hold it against the night because it will be theirs to lose. And when winter breaks they'll be yours whether they love you or hate you, because you gave them a place to put their dead. Silence. In it, the fire made a noise like a man dragging chains. Free folk farming under a stag, the Magnar said, dry as driftwood. We will need teaching. You'll be taught, Stannis said before he could stop himself. He heard the words as they left him and looked offended with his own mouth. You will swear, and you will be taxed, and the laws will learn you, Mance said, and there was a kind of sadness in it. You'll take our oaths to the wall, not to you. Both, Stannis said. One will hold the other upright. Mance stared at him. It was not a friendly stare. It was a stare that weighed a man's story against the snow. He nodded once, as a traitor nods when he knows the other man has not haggled exactly to his liking, but the light is going, and he has miles to cover. We will swear to hold the wall, and the gift for as long as winter cares to test us, he said. We will not kneel. Not now. When the spring comes, and the dead go to dust again and your gods are satisfied, ask me then. I will give you your answer then, and not before. And if I say no, you can cut my head, and it will please you. Now want see. It will, Stannis said honestly. But I will not do it today. He turned to Jon. You will write the words. You will have them in Aemon's hand and in mine and in Mance Rayder's, and if any man later pretends he did not hear them, I will strangle him with this parchment. And now, a per chain is a chain, Davos murmured. We'll see if it holds, Stannis said. The paper holds for a time if men want it to. They wanted it to for a few days that felt like a month, and a month that felt like a season. The gate opened on a law, and children went first under a stag that had never seen such faces. and women went next and put their feet onto land that had been theirs in their fear, and now was theirs in the telling. Men in bronze sat in longhouses that had not been warm in 5 winters, and argued over where fences should run, and asked black brothers to explain measurement in terms that made sense to people who had used the horizon as a boundary their whole lives. Then boys were shown how to build a ditch that will fill with water and then ice and thereby become a wall. Mole's town men were shown how to make a thatch that does not go up like tinder when a single ash lands on the wrong day. A man from the Shadow Tower taught a girl from the Frozen Ridges how to make a hinge that does not freeze shut. In exchange, she taught him how to read wind over snow for hidden holes. 2 boys fought with fists for a pig, and then shared it because their mothers told them to, and the mothers were watching. A woman had her child and died, and Val took the child with a face like a declaration, and did not cry where anyone could see it. John told himself it was another woman, not Dalla, and then could not stand his own lie, and went to sit with Mance as the king held his son in hands that had learned how to be gentle, late and then too late. They burned the whites beyond the ditch because the wind was wrong on the day, and smoke must not be allowed to make paths where none existed. There were fewer whites than there might have been, and that worried John more than if there had been more. They learning, Wraith said simply, and made knots in a cord that meant something to her, and perhaps to the air. Eastwatch sent boats south, with letters tied up like food on feast days. White Harbor received one, and a fat lord with guile wrote a reply that said much in a small, careful hand. Queen's Crown saw riders, and riders at the Queen's Crown made messy prints that overlapped other prints that were not prints men had made. And a patrol went and did not come back, and a second went and brought back the sound of silence as proof. Stannis split his strength like a miser whose calculations shock him. He left more men at the wall than he had wanted, and took fewer than he needed, and sent Davos south with a small escort, on a fast thing that had no beauty, but a great passion for getting where it meant to. If Manderley can be made to eat sense, Stannis said dourly, he will feed it to me with a spoon. If he cannot, he will pretend he can and poison me with it. I prefer the first. A boy with a wolf in him is south of us, Melisandre said, into no one's ear. And a girl with needles, and a king with a crown of snow, and a man with a sword that drinks cold. It will be interesting. I do not like interesting, Stannis said. I like possible. Then make it possible, Melisandre said, unfazed. You are that sort of man. Bowen Marsh resembled a man gnawing a bit without understanding what it did. He hated this law that was not law, and didn't say so because around Aemon's chair words went apart like loaves before a hungry family, and there was nothing left to throw. He counted sacks of oats, and doubted every number, and was right half the time and wrong the other. He watched Jon with love, and with a kind of hatred that had not known how to speak until taught. The others came in small ways at first. The wind forgets and learns a sound. A light moves where light should not be. A horse that had minded its tether one night does not mind it the next, and the next morning it stands with its nose in the corner as if ashamed and will not look at men. 2 days after that, it is dead, and the eyes do not belong to it anymore. They tested fences. They listened to the clank of new-made hinges. They looked at the ditches that would fill with ice and smiled, and though no man saw that smile, he felt it. On a night where the moon found a gap in the weather and used it greedily, the ravens went drunk with nothing. They flew till their wings stuttered, and then dropped upon the wall and clung, and looked at one another as if asking the question birds cannot be bothered to form. Jon stood at a top walk with Val, and with the then whose name Jor had once written in a list, and who had never cared if Southerners mangled it. They looked north. They did not need to speak. A line of light moved among the trees not like torches but like thought. Here, and then there, and then behind you, and then above. Tomorrow, Val said, not as a prophecy but as a domestic decision, like saying we are out of salt. Tomorrow, Jon agreed. And the word was a knife he put between his teeth, and kept there so his mouth would remember its shape. The morning came in bad moods. Stannis had not returned from the South Road after seeing his men to positions near the Queen's Crown, where his map said a knuckle of ground could be made to serve. Mance had been in the yard all night with his son in someone else's arms and had not gone to lie down, even when those arms grew tired. Eamon had slept and woken and known the effort of both. The drums of the dead do not sound the way men's do. They happen behind the eyes. The men at the ditch stood with their spears and could not feel their feet. The ditch itself, ornamented work that it was, could not decide whether to be water or glass, and compromised in the worst fashion, being neither in a way that would hold weight if you tried, and would not if you trusted. The first of them came at full day, because the dead mock men by pretending to belong to their hours. They walked out of the trees the way the trees might walk if they had legs, quietly, neither slow nor fast, with the perfect intent of things that cannot be wounded except by the thing that must be found and used exactly right. They wore rime instead of mail and eyes, instead of helmets, and their blades were light turned solid, and then forgetting it had been light, and being ashamed of its previous softness. They were not many. Why would they be? And they did not need to be. Joan's sword in his hand did not warm with his blood, though he hoped for it. He drew breath and held it, and let it out, and stepped into the thing. Val was at his left, and the then at his right, and behind him Gren and Satin, and men from Eastwatch, with hands like dock lines and Mance's people who understood how to bind a thing's legs with rope, and then laugh at it when it fell. The first white one looked at John with a regard so thorough he felt himself catalogued. The clash made a child's music. High, crystalline, foolish. Longclaw did not shatter. It leapt and sang, and the iron in it remembered old forges, and old cold, and made a sound like black water under ice when you strike it. John struck, and the sword went through the thing as if it were made of a thought. And the thought went out, and the body fell and became a poem about snow. It took everything in him not to be glad. Gladness is a kind of distraction. He struck again. He fought like a man whose mind has no room for what will come when the fight is over. Men screamed in decent ways and indecent. The ditch did its bad compromise, holding for some, failing others, and drowned a man in winter water, clean enough to drink. Arrows went and broke, and went, and broke again. Val's knife took a creature's thumb, and the creature looked at its hand as if insulted, and then at Val, as if she had said a clever thing he wished to cut out of her mouth. She laughed and slid away, and made him grow clumsy, and then she was behind him, and the knife made a new idea in his spine, and he folded. The then spoke a prayer that was only one word long, and must have been old before bronze was discovered, and his spear did what spears are for, and became for a moment the only real thing in the world. Satin's blade found a place that had forgotten its own edge, and helped it remember. Gren bled, and then did not, and kept standing. He would think about the bleeding later and be grateful later when someone filled a cup, and he did not drop it. John caught sight of Mance, his cloak too bright for prudence, and exactly right for now, moving like a man walking through threads, his harp hand forgotten, and his other doing the arithmetic of men and death without visible suffering. He cut, he kicked, he threw a knee, he stepped back, he laughed once at someone's stupid bravery. He called a name, and the man came and lived because he had been called. He moved like a king does when there are witnesses that matter, his people and men who might be his. A shape bigger than sense came up out of the drift, as if the drift had had an opinion that morning and chosen to make muscle out of itself. A white bear with half its face gone and one eye that had not learned it was not useful. It lifted into the line like a wave. Men screamed properly this time. It got two in its arms and made noises out of their bodies that the bodies had not made before. The then went for its legs because the then was not a poet, and his spear shaft broke with a noise like one of those thin winter songs boys whistle. John took 3 steps, 2 in snow, 1 in something that had been a man, and put Longclaw where the bear's mouth had once been, and pushed until the world gave, and even then it took too long. Fire came up from the ditch, real fire, shouting. As if remembering what it had been taught, men had found oil, and had decided to be careless with it in the right way, and the wind helped, because for once the wind liked them. The light on the swords of the others changed color slightly, a thing you notice because something in you is good at noticing what might kill you. Two of them stood among men as if in a crowd of children, and then both stepped back at once, as if their feet had been burned by a thought. They looked at each other with that flat, insulted stare that made them so frightening, and then something said something that no one heard, and they were moving away with the exact dignity of a man, leaving a hall where he has been insulted and will kill his host another day. They went, not far. Far enough that you could call it a reprieve without it being a lie. The men in the ditch took the chance to pull their legs out of bad ideas. Men who had swords wiped them, and did not know they had done it. Men who had no swords found one, and did not know they had done that either. John stood with long claws point low, and the horn's strap pulling at his shoulder, like a word he did not dare say. He could feel the thing in it, whether it was a lie or a truth or both. He had no wish to blow it. He had never wanted to blow it less. He had never wanted to blow it more. Not today, Mance said at his shoulder, breathing as if he had been singing. If that thing has a voice that can speak to the wall, let us use our own mouths until they are taken to stone. Agreed, Stannis said, on the other side. And the three of them stood the way men stand on a cliff, and do not mention the height. The day did not end. It turned its face in the air, and showed another face, and then another. The dead did not come again. Men pretended to believe in luck. After, in the hall, Aemon's hands shook, and he told them the cost in that quiet, even tone. The same he would have used if the numbers had been bread or rope, instead of men. He did not say, "We cannot afford this." He said, "This is what it cost." Stannis listened with a grim acceptance. He had made his choice, and perhaps he liked now that the choice had demanded something of him. Men who are always having their choices accepted grow sour on the taste of them. "Right," he said to John, when the dead had been counted, and the living had stopped moving. "Right to White Harbor, and to Deepwood Motte, and to any Umber who remains with his wits. Tell them we are holding with free folk at our side. Tell them not to play with names, but with stores. Tell them I will come and take their oaths when the dead have decided to be reasonable. When I come, I will have a longer list of names, and if they are not on it, they will wish they had been." "Burn," John wrote. Sam ground the ink with such concentration his tongue stuck out of his mouth like a boy's. Aemon put his hand on the page when it had dried and knew where the letters lay by memory of where letters always lie, and he smiled with a pride he did not need to hide. When Joan's hand cramped and he set the quill aside, the horn lay where he could see it without seeing it, near the brazier, where the heat bent the air and made every line around it unreliable. Val came and stood in the doorway and watched the room with that cool, assessing look of someone who has already chosen what she will save and what she will not. "He needs a mother," she said, and no one thought she meant John or Stannis or the wall. "He has one," Mance said, appearing like a human truth. His face had that flatness grief gives kings. "And he has the wall. Either would have to do." "Ma'am?" Val's mouth softened. "Either will do," she agreed. She went to the cradle they had made out of what had been a grain basket, and put her hand on the child's belly, and the child, who was not fooled by grief, kicked once with a power he had not earned. John looked away as if it would have been impolite to stare at Hope. That night, for once, men slept almost easily. They had done the day's stupidity and valor and were permitted to rest. John lay on his pallet in the little cell that had once been a place for a boy to hide his bread, and tried to imagine a spring. He could not. He could imagine Stannis at White Harbor telling Manderley what he would do, and Manderley smiling like a man who has a second tongue and a third stomach. He could imagine Davos in a small hall somewhere south with his good square hands out in a gesture meant to show empty palms and in fact holding a knife of words no one had seen yet. He could imagine Arya as he had last seen her, fierce and skinny, and with more in her face than any girl should have to hold. He could not imagine Robb sitting any throne because his mind would not let him betray the thing it knew. He turned and the horn was under his shoulder. He had not placed it there. He left it there and slept with the discomfort like a penance. Snow came hard in the midnight. They could hear it hit the shutters and make a noise like applause for a bad play. Morning was blind. Stannis had men out on the east road, and he sent a message back on a little knot of riders, with faces gray with ice, that said, "There is movement south, not the dead." A banner of flayed men. The word went through the hall and had the force of a spear thrown lazily. Men did not duck in time. Mance was amused in a way that had no pleasures in it. "You see," he said to Jon, "you do not have one winter. You have two." "The South is not a friend," Jon said. "They will quake at the stories," Val said, spinning a strap idly around her fingers. "They will think it a good time to steal while a neighbor's house is on fire. They will discover fire burns thieves as well." Stannis came in out of that white with his eyebrows rhymed and his temper honed. "Ramsay Snow," he said with contempt enough in the name to melt ice. "Playing king's man with flayed skin on a pole. He will cut my line of supply if we let him. He may try to take what he thinks is a weakened wall. He will wear our bodies like new cloaks if we let him," Mance said. "He loves skins. I've seen the work of the Dreadfort in men's eyes." "Bendaro. We will not let him," Stannis said. And for a moment king and king smiled at one another like killers who admire each other's knives. "I will go out and slap him." "You will die in a ditch if you go out with that many and in this weather," Aemon said with the serene brutality only the very old can manage. "You will stay, and he will come. And he will find a place with ditches and dikes and men behind them that do not have any taste for being flayed. He will also find men with bronze on their heads who cannot be cowed by your noble houses, because they do not know your noble houses and care nothing for your stories. He will learn something, and it will not be what he hoped." "Then Dantur." Stannis regarded the blind man and said nothing because there was nothing to say to a dragon who has decided to counsel you. "We will make a place," he said to Mance. "We have two hands," Mance said. "We will use both." They set men about the work of raising snow to a purpose. It is a strange thing to look at a white field and decide to turn it into a hornet's nest. Men with sledges, and men with shovels, and men with their hands, because hands are still useful in a world that likes to pretend they are not, moved snow into ridges that took men 1 heart to step over and 3 to retreat across. They made ditches in the half-frozen ground where they must, and filled them with the water that hates men, and watched it set into glass where it wanted, and took a stick to it where it didn't. They set stakes in bundles that could be carried by men who had never carried stakes, and therefore carried them badly at first, and then better. They made small fires under tripods of green wood, where smoke would be reluctant, and men would be warmed only because their bodies had earned it. They made lanes that could be shut by a single rope. The Thens brought up shields from stores no man remembered having, and looked at them with a distaste that was mostly respect, and then taught boys how to lock them in ways that made the word wall into a little thing that lived under the arm. The Boltons came into that with the complacent fury of men who have always cut one kind of meat, and believe all meat cuts the same way. Their banners looked wrong up here, their red too gaudy, and their pale flayed thing foolish beside this white Bible of a world. Ramsay himself did not come, of course. None of the important ones come first. He sent men with his father's ugly carefulness and his own appetite, and they saw in the first row that this was not the same as running down small folk in a field near the weeping water. They came on again and were hit by a sliding of snow that men had worked 10 hours to make look like an accident. They came on once more, and a line of free folk loosed stones from slings with a mathematic grace, and the front of the charge turned into men whose luck had ended. They tried to set fires under the ditch so the water would decide not to freeze. The wind took their flames and taught them about the way a god works up here. They fell back and remade their lines and tried the other flank, and the other flank had been made into not a flank at all, but an idea of one, and ideas do not bleed. Stannis did not ride. He stood upon a small rise with boots planted square and his hands behind him, and his expression, one a boy might wear when a toy he has invented is being tested by other boys, and he cannot choose whether to be proud or angry. Mance walked the lines and mocked and cheered and corrected, and set a spear right in a boy's hand, and told him a joke he'd been saving, and made the boy laugh, and then move his foot. Ramsay's men did not press madly. The Boltons have always known how to wait. They made a camp just close enough to be uncomfortable, and sent small things along the edge to catch men unawares. The first night, a man went to piss and did not come back. The next morning they found him near a drift with no skin on his face and a grin carved on where his mouth had been. Mance made a small, tight order that the body be burned. Stannis started to say something about burial and the words died unspoken, because there are laws and there are laws, and the wall has its own old tongue. The dead kept a respectful distance that day, which frightened Jon more than when they came close. He had learned to worry when wolves did not howl. He walked the top with Val and a boy from Eastwatch, who could see a rabbit move at 100 paces, and could not read a letter. They watched the bright red down there in the south, and the brighter white in the north, and the small black that was them in between, and felt like a bead on a string between two world necklaces. "What do you want?" Val asked Jon suddenly, her voice for him alone. He thought of the honest answers and the lies that would have been more comfortable, and he tired of both. "A spring," he said. "A place where a boy can look out and think of the work he will do, and the food he will eat, and the woman he will talk to, and not have to pull his cloak tighter against the cold he cannot name because it is everywhere. I want a night where I do not wake and listen for footsteps that do not belong to any living thing. I want my sister to have a simple quarrel with someone she can see, and not a war with men who use knives because they like the way people look surprised. I want to be told my oath kept a thing alive, not that it obeyed a word." He surprised himself and laughed low. "And you? You will tell me to want something sensible now." "I want a son without enemies," Val said. "Or if he must have enemies, I want him to have good ones. I want him to grow with a knife in his hand and not a horn. I want to be an old woman who complains about aching knees because I have kneecaps to ache. And I want a man who sings well in winter and knows when not to talk in summer. It is a long list." "Kings might give some of it," Jon said. "Kings might take it," Val said. She looked at him, and the look was not unkind. "You do not want to be a king," she observed. "No," Jon said. It surprised him how little surprise he could muster for the notion. "I want to be a man. Men do not regret having asked for help. That is harder than wearing a crown," Val said dryly. "Crowns forgive stupidity and their owners." He smiled at that, a small thing in a day that had not given him many. The wind pushed hair into his eyes and he let it. When he looked back down to the south, the Boltons were moving again. Not recklessly, with that grim persistence that makes their name fit all they put it on. He was so focused on the red, he almost missed the white. It came like a veil being shaken out. The northern light among the trees thickened, as if the trees had gone to sap so suddenly, the air turned syrup. Men on the wall said words like God and gods, and then stopped, because those had not listened. The first rank of the dead did not walk this time. They came on like a learned thing, silent and quick and confident. Their eyes like old ice that has been underweight for centuries, and wants to tell you what that did to it. In their wake the air decided to stop being kind to lungs for a while. "Down," Mance said below, not shouting, and men who were at the ditch went to their tasks. "Up," Stannis said at the center, and men who were loosing stones on cords lifted their arms. "Hold," Jon said, and he did not mean anyone outside his own chest. He meant his heart, which had its own ideas about pace. The white and the red did not mingle. For a foolish moment Jon had time to be grateful. Then he saw it was worse. The line on the south stood and watched as if hoping their enemies would take care of these strangers. The dead came at the ditch and did not care what south men thought. They did not care about anything men thought. The ditch smoked when they moved through its breath, and when they stepped into it, some went down and some did not, and those who did not looked down at those who did as if recording a name. Jon felt the horn heavy as law on his back. He would not blow it. He would blow it only when the world asked for a word no man's mouth could say, and he did not know when that was, and so he did not trust his judgment enough to name it. He raised Longclaw instead, and remembered Donal Noy and Mag the Mighty in a breath that had no room for anything else. "Now," he said, and the line that was his line moved, Night's Watch and free folk and sailors who had learned to plant their feet without skidding. They took the first of the dead on the points of spears they had learned to use yesterday, and then on the flats of blades, They had learned at their grandfather's knees, and for a few heartbeats, the world was not a story about kings, but about how you put your weight on your left foot, while being very careful about where your right went next. Stannis moved forward 3 steps because he was that sort of man. Then remembered he had made himself a promise not to die stupidly, and stepped back 1. Davos was not there to frown at him and approve him in the same moment. He would have. The others were not men, but they were not gods either. They could be pissed off. They did not scream when angered. They focused. One of them fixed his attention upon Mance Rayder, and the air around Mance remembered every unkind thing that air can do to human minds. Mance's breath came out and froze and fell to the ground like tinkling bells. He smiled at the thing, and the smile was human and contemptuous, and brave and fake. He stepped in with his bright cloak and his dark blade, and found the place in that cold where a blade can live. It was not enough. The other raised his own pale blue edge, and it met Mance's iron with a noise like a cat laughing, and the iron failed. Not the way common iron fails, shattered, but the way courage fails, thin and then thinner and then nothing. The blow after would have taken Mance's hand at the wrist if someone had not stepped in and placed a sword between. Jon did not remember moving. Longclaw took the thing's attention the way it took light, immediately and with insolence. The blades recognized each other without liking each other. The sound they made was a new one even for this wall. The other tilted its head with the odd patience of something that never forgets and never hurries, and then came at Jon with a scholar's precision and a butcher's promise. Jon met it, parried, slid, felt the cold creep up into his wrists, and told his wrists to behave. On the second exchange, the other expected a retreat, and Jon gave him a step forward. On the third, it expected a clever little turn, and Jon gave it a brute smash, shoulder to shoulder, like a man in a tavern. For one obscene heartbeat, the other's balance failed. That was a thing Jon had not believed he would ever see. He took it, wasted nothing, brought the edge up under that pale guard, and through the place where arm and torso made a marriage. And whatever vows the two of those had taken went to snow. The creature's inside went down its outside as frost goes if you show it salt. It made no sound. It did not approve of sound. Jon stood with his chest heaving and looked around at work he could still do. Enough, Stannis said then. Not to Jon, but to the south. The Boltons had been waiting for something, and it had come. Here was a king and a dead army. Ramsay Snow would not be able to make a sport of this without learning a lesson he could not bear. The red banners went back. They went back in good order because the men under them were not fools. And they went back because nightmares are a poor field for flaying. The dead did not pursue. They had done their work. They had made men remember what was north, even while the south tried to be important. They thinned back into the trees like regret. After, when the world had put its arms back on and decided to keep them, Stannis went to Mance with a face that might have been called respect on a kinder man. You kept your feet, he said. I have to, Mance said. My child is learning to walk. Stannis snorted. Your mouth is the only thing more dangerous than your sword, he said. We will sign your paper, and you will hold these fields for me. You will send men to the top of the wall who will stand when I am not looking. I will send men to stand when you are not looking. We will both be looking as much as possible. And when the spring comes and you ask again, Mance said. I will ask, Stannis said. You will give me an answer. I will have my throne, or I will have the north. Perhaps I will have neither, and the world will have me. I do not care which, so long as the wall still stands. I do not like losing twice. Ben, no. You are learning, Mance said, and if there was insult, it was small and neat. Jon stood a little away and watched them and thought of the things he would have to do tomorrow. Write more letters with words that pleased the wrong men. Stand at the top and make another line, and tell Grennan to sleep, and tell Satin not to sing a funny song in front of a queen, and tell Val the thing he could not tell himself. Be patient and tell himself the thing he could not tell himself. Be patient and tell himself the thing he could not tell her. Do not hope too much. He felt very tired, the kind of tired that lodges in the hinge of the jaw and behind the eyes. He looked at the horn and considered it, and the horn considered him back. Not today, he said to it, as if it had asked. And he put it away. and the day finished without needing that ancient, lying voice. Night came down like a lid. The wind had a new flavor in it, one he could not place. Stannis returned to Eastwatch to send south the letters that would be a test fit for any lord's heart. Mance lay down for the first time in 3 days, and did not sleep, because there are sleeps that remind a man of things he would not recall. He lay with his eyes open, and listened to his son's breath, and to the wall's low complaints, and decided the breath was more urgent. Aemon sat by a brazier and dozed with his head light against his chest, and in his sleep he smiled like a man who has remembered an old song, and is content not to be able to sing it. On the top of the wall, Jon stood where cold mixed glass of a man's tears, and would have stared through them if he had allowed any. He thought of Winterfell, and of a boy who had believed justice would present itself like a sword on a cushion. And he thought of a man who knew now that justice is most often a messy, dirty thing you pull out of a ditch. He thought of a girl with a sword, and a girl with a needle, and a boy with a wolf in him, and a man with a sword that drank cold somewhere to the south, if Melisandre's talk had a tongue. He thought of a spring. He tried again to imagine it. In his mind, the ditch was a brook. The stakes were bean poles. The dikes were fences holding pigs that were stupid and sleek. A child ran with a piece of bread in his fist and a dog at his heels. And both were happy, and both were hungry, and both would be fed. A woman laughed at a man who had tried to fix a hinge wrong, and the man laughed too because his mistake was ordinary and did not end any world. A banner hung limp in a wind that did not bite. A king somewhere far away argued with a fat lord over whether a tariff on salt should be 3 or 2, and they took pleasure in the argument because they had nothing better to worry. He let the picture go because it was too sweet to keep. He turned and walked along the parapet and listened to the creak and groan and little songs the ice made. And every sound was a promise and a threat, and that, he thought, was a kingdom worth the name. A place where promises and threats came from the same truth. The dawn that would follow would bring another skirmish or two at the flayed man camp, and another test at the ditch from the pale things, and another argument over fences and oaths, and whether a man owed his king seed or soldiers, and how many high. It would bring a courier in who had ridden hard from the Queen's crown on a horse whose bones showed, and who said in a voice ragged with cold that men with trout on their shields were moving quietly in the white and asking the wrong questions, and Stannis would frown and make new sums. It would bring Sam a page with news that would make his hands shake and spill ink on the word hope, and make him cry with gratitude at the smallness of the stain. And it would bring Jon another day where he could say not today to the horn, and yes today to the wall, and to the black, and to the faces of men who expected him to tell them where to put their feet. He had not chosen to belong to this thing. Perhaps it had chosen him. He went on, and the wall breathed steadily, and Mance Rayder slept for a little while at last. And far away a king dreamed of a throne with ice on it and woke angry because he had preferred, against all no habit, the feeling of snow on his cheeks to the weight of gold in his hand. The dead dreamed of nothing, and waited with that patience Jon had learned to hate and respect in equal measure. He pulled his cloak tighter, and the wind took the loose end and flicked it like a banner. And Jon smiled because there was something like a joke in that, and he felt very nearly, if not happy, then at least complete, as a man can be for an hour in a world that does not permit much finishing. He went on along the wall as the east grew the faintest color, and the world under him, flawed and cold and suddenly, perhaps possible, rolled toward another day. Okay. The morning after the dead stepped back, the light came grudgingly, a thin wash that did not deserve the name, and the wind slackened as if it too were weary of its own voice. Jon came down from the walkway with salt stinging his lips where the cold had cracked them, and an ache between his shoulder blades that no sleep had touched. In the yard, men were already at their stubborn tasks. Shovels tossing snow into the shape of a ditch that would be deeper today than yesterday. Rope being measured against stubborn posts. A cooper squinting at a staved barrel's glum gaps as if he could shame it into holding water. The smell of onions came from the kitchen sheds, thin and honest, and with it, the meaner smell of wool that would never be dry. Bowen Marsh intercepted him by the racks where pikes had been laid for repair. There was color high in the old bear's steward's cheeks that had nothing to do with cold. "A raven, Lord Snow," he said, and Jon pretended not to notice the title as another knife between them. From the east road, Riders. Boltons? John asked. Karstarks, Marsh said, and the word made the snow underfoot a fraction harder. A party of 23 at least, maybe more behind. Their banner captain says they have business with Stannis Baratheon. Them? Stannis is at Eastwatch, John said, thinking aloud. They'll learn it soon enough. Then, because habit had already begun to make places in his mouth for new thoughts. And who rides at their head? Marsh's mouth worked. A girl or a woman not yet used to the name. Ace, he calls herself. She asks parley in the old gods' names. Nender. John did not ask how Bowen had learned a name before the rider came through the gate. Information bled. Men listened. He swung through the yard with Marsh in his wake and came to the gate tunnel where the lamps always smoked, and the ice always had a way of sweating that made a man's shoulders hunch as if something higher were dripping its disapproval upon him. In the arch mouth, the world was a block of cold light, and there, with 2 men in her shadow and snow in her lashes, sat a slim figure upon a shag-haired Garin that had learned the taste of the gift's bad weather. She had the look of a Karstark, all the lean stark lines sharpened for harder land. Wind had stripped her lips to their truth. Her hair was a black rope at her back under a hood rimed white. She sat square in the saddle, which said father or winter, or both had taught her early. Elise Karstark, she said when John stood before her. Daughter to Rickard. She did not add the next word. Men did it for her. Traitor, Bowen Marsh muttered reflexively, with that furtive steadfastness of his. Elise did not look at him. Her eyes stayed on John. She saw the black and the sword and the weariness like a collar around his throat, and weighed them and apparently did not find them wanting. Lord Commander, she said, and if she felt the stretch of that title around him, she hid it. I see, guessed right. A horn blew down the road behind her, 2 notes close together. The second, a threat, not an alarm. Her men shifted. The Garin tossed its head. Your pursuers? John asked. My uncle's men, she said. My father's brother, Arnulf Erdalf. He would wed me to his son, and then take Carhold by calling me a wife, and therefore a thing that couldn't inherit. I called myself Swift instead. In the bare crooked corner of her mouth might have been humor elsewhere. Here it was defiance run thin. John made the old sign with 2 fingers without thinking, as men do who grew up near hearths that still remembered the way gods speak. Dismount, he said. And come in. Guessed right is guessed right. He did not look to Bowen Marsh to see if the steward twitched. They brought her through the tunnel at a trot, the lamps omen bright around them. And when her boot touched the yard's packed snow, the men, even those whose minds were gifts to numbers and doubts, made space the way men do when something has entered that will need room. She was shaking with cold now that it had permission. She did not let it shake her voice. Do you have bread? She asked, blunt and old-fashioned as a prayer. We have bread, John said. He took her himself into the common hall, where the fire had been coaxed into an obedient thick flame, and the long tables bore the scars of years of hard elbows. The roof had its smoke caught like a spider web gone ash. Men watched without staring. He broke a heel from a loaf and put salt upon it, and laid it in her palm. She raised it, touched it to her tongue, ate. 2 of her men did the same. The third, the slim one with the hunter's guard in his shoulders, watched the door with the raven brightness of a man who has learned to distrust the comfort of roofs. They're behind me, Alice said once she had warmth in her fingers and the bread's honest dullness in her mouth. And they will claim me and the Mistwood for Carhold in the name of my uncle's line and yours. I have a line. So did your father, Marsh said tightly. He walked from it, and from us, into a noose built from his own anger. Ace turned her head on that slim neck, and regarded him as if she had found the man who had set a thorn in her boot, and decided whether to forgive it. My father liked the rope as a tail, she said. He told it to boys and called it law. It turned out law when it came to him in iron. He was my father. I loved him. when he could be loved. He gave me a name, and he made it hard to bear. And now the wolves' heads hang at the Dreadfort and Carhold lights, fires for strangers. The oaths are ashes. Someone must make new ones. Then, she shifted her gaze to John. Her mouth quirked again. If it pleases you and your gods. The hall's temperature altered in that small way men feel in the skin before they feel it on the cheek. Interest. John took a breath that made his chest crack. Stannis Baratheon will want words in this, he said. He is south with his men, but not far. The Night's Watch will give you guessed right. The law of men south of us is the king's to pull over your head when he arrives. You may sleep without fear under this roof, while you have my trust. Earn it. Then himself. I will pay for it with enemies, Alice said dryly. We are rich in those. She slept with a knife in her hand nevertheless, and did not wake when men came and went all night under that roof. Builders smelling of wet wood, sailors smelling of pitch, free folk who smelled of animals and salt and old iron. When dawn was hardly more than a rumor of gray, the horn on the west wall spoke briefly, and then spoke again in a voice that made the hair stir under fur. Riders. D. The yard bristled with spears moved by men whose hands remembered the way. They made a lane as they had for Stannis, not too wide. Arnulf Karstark came through it a horse-length tall, with his son Cragen at his side and half a dozen hard men behind who had forgotten how to laugh years ago, and now did not recall why they would want to relearn. The uncle had Rickard's nose and none of his good looks. His beard had gone to frost. His eyes had not. They had the small perpetual wetness of a man who has petitioned harsh winds too long. He brought his animal up short when he saw the line of black, and something that might have been humor twisted his mouth. Crows, he said softly, as if the word were a treat he meant to savor. And felons. I smell both. And well. Carhold ought recall manners, Bowen Marsh said, and the frost on his voice made the air look twice at him. You stand under our ice. I stand under nothing, Arnulf said. Then, blinking, polite, I stand to reclaim my brother's daughter. She is promised to my blood. She will be safer with us than among thieves and beggars. She is under our bread, John said. And you do not take bread out of a host's mouth and expect your own to stay full. The old man regarded him with curiosity and distaste both, as a boy might regard a servant lecturing him on sums. Who are you, bastard? He asked, the last word delivered without malice, but not without purpose. Jon Snow of Winterfell, Jon said, sworn brother to the Night's Watch. Arnulf's gaze flicked over him and up to the wall beyond, and to the furs and bronze and black in the lanes, and to the thin winter sky that had decided to let the sun show its face as a pale disk for a moment, and then changed its mind. He saw a shape that was not the one he had come expecting to hurt. He put his hands out in a gesture that in another land would have meant peace, and here meant nothing. Then do not interfere in the North's marriages, he said. You have your law, we have ours. Give me my niece. Aes entered the yard with her hair braided back like a woman ready to work, and the snow on her boots like proof she had come from somewhere harsher than this. The murmurs ran through the yard like rabbits that know how to find holes. Arnulf did not turn his head like a father, slowly and with relief. He turned as a man turns for the hawk that might be his. Niece, he said richly, pouring kindness on her as if it were coin. She looked at him, and then away, and then came to stand not beside Jon but near him, where the shadow of a spear's head fell across a patch of packed crust snow. Uncle, she said politely, I have taken guest right, and will forfeit it, Arnulf said. When a king asks, there is a king to the south with a claim in his fist. Stannis will give me my rights. Though, perhaps, came the file-bright voice from the gate, and heads turned again as easily as weather vanes in a gust. Stannis Baratheon had the snow in his eyebrows again. He did not look as if he had ridden hard. He never looked as if he had done anything but stand still and get colder. Davos was with him, and 3 kings' men with eyes like habit. Arnulf bowed. It wasn't deep. Stannis accepted it, as if the man had bent half his spine. Your Grace, Arnulf said, and made that title into a confession he meant to be praised for. You are Arnulf Karstark, Stannis said. You are also an old man, and old men should be wiser or quieter. Davos' mouth tugged at one corner. Arnulf's eyes glittered. My king, he corrected gently. The North's laws will be the North's if I let them, Stannis said, not irritated, merely truthful in that way that made other men itch. Your brother was a traitor, and I cut his head with the law's blessing. His children were not traitors, and so far the law's blessing has not been consulted. This girl, he looked at Alice, and his gaze was a kind of hand that weighed, claims guessed right, and the ancient peace under the watch. I will not tear that for your convenience. You would tear it for your own, Arnulf said. When you need men. I need men who obey laws because they imagine themselves good, Stannis said. I have had my fill of men who obey because they have been taught fear. He turned to Jon, abrupt as a bell. What would you do? He demanded. The Yard's attention tilted as neatly as the king's had. Jon did not pretend he had not thought about it since Marsh said the name. Marry her, he said. If she's willing. Arnulf made a noise. Cragen's hand went to his sword and then fell away because there were too many eyes. Stannis raised a brow. To whom? He asked, already half knowing. Men who have fought 1,000 battles always guess the angles. Jon lifted his chin toward the Yard. Sigorn, he said. Magnar of Thenn. He holds a people who need law and land, and she holds a land that needs people who can bear winter. Wed them. Give Karhold new wolves. Put an end to Arnulf's talk of blood by making a new blood. Then? It rang in the Yard, and men looked at one another as men always do when someone else has done something difficult and made it look simple. The Then stood under the eaves near the racks, bronze bright and bareheaded, and his face did not move because it did not occur to him that a face should betray what the heart was considering. He stepped forward through the aisle. Men made the same way they had for the king. I will take her, he said coolly. Then, in the same breath, if she takes me. Stannis looked at Alice. So did everyone. She drew breath and held it, and let it go and looked at Arnulf, the way a woman looks at a deck that will pitch under her whether she chooses to cross it or not. I would rather freeze standing, she said, than be warm lying down in the wrong bed. She held out her hand with a courage that did not know to be ashamed of itself. The Then took it in his bronze hard one. Some relief went through the Yard like a wind that had remembered to be kind. Arnulf's mouth made something ugly, and then shut it with a practiced grace that had persuaded men less careful than Stannis for years. You will pay for this, the old man said, honey staining the threat. I always do, Stannis said dryly, and to Jon, write it. Call the gods. Use them all. I will be witness, which is more than most gods offer. Mennerwind. They married at dusk, when the cold makes breath look like incense and the branches of the weirwood stand like a prayer written in bone. The godswood of Castle Black is a poor cousin to the south's. Stump and snow and a heart tree, whose face looks carved by a knife that had been in too many hands. Jon stood on Stannis' left, and Mance on his right, and Aemon muttered rites that had last been sung as often in guttural tongues as in the common, and a Then's low answer joined them, his deep voice fitting into the old trees, voice like a river into its bed. Val stood behind Alice with a hand at her elbow, and the girl did not lean, and did not need to, but liked that it was there. She said the words with a ferocity that made the smallest hairs rise in Jon's ears. Sigorn spoke the vow with slow care, as if each word were a metal he must set into a mold before it cool. He looked bewildered once, when Aemon guided his palm to the heart tree's face, and blood beaded, and freckled the white and the red, made a modest noise as if pleased. He did not look bewildered when Alice pricked her own hand and put her blood on the same bark, eyes on eyes. Around them, free folk in black cloaks and king's men stood together, their breath making a plain. In a corner of the poor godswood, Bowen Marsh and Othel Yarwick muttered about precedents and paper, and then shut their mouths because the cold has no patience for petty law. After, the feast was meager by Southron measures, and magnificent by the walls. Onion broth thick enough to notice, salt beef that had been warmed a second time, bread that had been saved for this, and a cask of ale that had come from Eastwatch, slung and sledged and carried like a relic. Men who would have sooner bled one another for insults today lifted cups and drank for strangers. Stannis drank, grimacing at the ale's thin judgment. Davos drank and looked glad. Mance drank and held his son under the table with one broad hand, so the boy would smell human warmth all night long. Arnulf left at first dark, with his son and his hard men. Banners put away because a piece of law had been written that he could not easily tear without tearing himself. He turned once between the first and second bends in the road and looked back up at the wall, and the light caught his face and made it briefly candid. Jon thought for a breath he saw fear there, and then it was gone, like a hare that decides to keep going. News from the sea came in like weather. A small, careful hand from White Harbor wrote that salt beef and oats would follow the letter if the road did not eat the carters, and that any Manderley soldiers found near the Dreadfort were near it by accident and would be politely confused if questioned. The letter smelled faintly of lamp oil and something heavier, and Davos read it and smiled the way a man smiles at a net that has caught exactly what he had told it to. Stannis signed a grant in a hand that looked like iron nails. The watch might quarry obsidian from Dragonstone's flanks and take it north at will. Any man who set his hand in the way would lose the hand. "I do not like giving," he said, and the pen's tip scratched like a rat. "But I like enemies with good swords less. What will we make of it?" Othel Yarwick demanded. Spitting into the brazier with builder's contempt for paper decisions. Noy is gone. I can make a hinge that will make a queen thank me, but I cannot teach this glass to bite. Bendan de Siwa, a free folk woman from the Milkwater called Sala. Broad, with a laugh that dismissed men and then admitted them again, put her hand up as if in a kinsman's counsel. "We do not set it like iron," she said. "We glue it with pitch to shafts and learn to throw the shafts again. You put it on bone and it bites true. It breaks and it's meant to, but it bites first." Bah. Othel listened with the expression of a man told a new way to tie an old knot. "Show me," he grunted. She did. He made a noise low in his chest, and then became a man who would build new things all winter without complaint, now that he had been insulted by novelty. Bowen Marsh counted casks, and doubted his counts, and began again. He opposed in murmurs, then in petitions, then in a meeting of senior men, where he used the word oath, until it lost its edges and lay dull as a coin passed between too many fingers. "We have a rule," he insisted, voice thick with a piety that had nowhere wholesome to go. "We have a charter. We are not kings." "You are not," Stannis said, unsparing. "If you were, your heads would be on spikes already for what you've done to your realm. Be content with being men." Maester Aemon's thin hands trembled when he poured wine into cups that did not deserve it. His cough grew a little heavier each morning. The cold was not for old men, and he had already survived more winters than any man has a right to. He remained kind, which is a fiercer thing than men admit. He called Sam to his table one afternoon when the day was blue above the ice and said, "There will be a ship to Old Town at some point before the ice takes every channel. When it comes, we will put my bones on it and yours. The Citadel will hear a living man tell them of the dead, or if not living then, a man who died telling it. The world will do as it wills, but we will have obeyed our part." Then Sam's mouth opened and shut, and he made the noises of gratitude and terror, and sorrow in the wrong order, and then the right, and then he cried into his hands, and Aemon let him, and then patted his shoulder with a hand that shook, but knew what it was for. Jon found out that night and went to the rookery, and stood among ravens that made his hair gritty with their talk, and told himself this too was right. He did not believe it for an hour. Then he found himself believing it for 2 minutes, and then 5, and then he stopped trying to count. The horn lay always near when the council met, which is to say more often than was good for any of them. Men did not look at it directly. They looked at the place where it was not. Melisandre took to sitting closer to it than others liked, as if testing it with her heat. More than once Jon caught her eyes on the child in Val's arms. She did not make a mystery of it. King's blood is tinder, she said conversationally. One evening when wind pushed the door at its latch until the wood squealed. Hard to light and good for burning once it does. You will not lay a hand on him, Val said in a soft, indifferent tone that nevertheless filled the hall like a strike. You will not lay a look upon him without my leave. King's blood has made a great mess of things south of us. Let it rest. Up here we use oil and cloth and wits. Then Stannis glanced between them. As a man looks between two dogs, he has not decided to breed. He did not say yes to Val or no to the woman in red. And if his caution stung, he refused to be embarrassed by it. We will burn nothing that is not wood, he said at last. And a few letters. The weather spun its little tricks. A day so clear that a man could see a hair move on the far end of the yard, and think of summer. A day of fog that the wall wore like wool, and that left beards beaded, and the ice itself sweating like a man who has realized he owes money to a lord. A day of wind that took a man's breath, and did not give it back without being asked twice. The Boltons held at their distance, and sent scouts with knives, and left gifts in the snow. A flayed squirrel, a strip of skin, a smile cut into a piece of bark. Their patience was not human. But hunger is, and their fires ate through what they had brought, and the roads brought them less. Stannis sent little bands out to cut their little roads, and they brought back bundles of 7 men caught drowsing, and one with a tongue nailed to a post for talking back to a captain, and a boy who cried for his mother and could not have been more than 12. Stannis looked at the boy and saw his own squire and set his jaw, and sent him into the kitchens, and no one dared laugh when the boy came into the yard 3 days later, with a ladle tucked at his belt, the way other boys wore knives. From the north, the others made their smaller rehearsals. A white hare came into the yard at noon and sat under the eaves and watched men with a calm that made them consider their sins. A patch of rime appeared on the west wall, and would not scrape off, and beneath it the ice sounded different for an hour, as if thinner, before deciding to be itself again. A man in a fur cloak with eyes like a storm walked up out of a drift with no footprints behind him, and stood at the ditch, and stared, and then went away like smoke in a high wind. Jon slept badly those nights, and woke with the horn in his hand, even when he had left it across the room. He began to dream of Ghost without surprise. The dreams were of bone-pale fur, and a tongue heavy with cold, and of red eyes that had nothing to do with Melisandre's heat, and everything to do with the old woods. The third night he woke with the certainty that if he went to the East Watchwalk, he would find the shape of his life waiting. He did not trust certainty in winter, but he trusted the ache with which his chest said the name. Ghost stood on the parapet where no wolf should stand, the wind making a flag of his thick tail, his ears pricked as if he had always belonged on black ice. He turned that great white head and looked at Jon, and the whole north stopped arguing for a heartbeat. Jon went to his knees, and the wolf came and put his head into Jon's chest and breathed him in and then out as if they were one creature, and the accident of different skins had both amused and offended the gods long ago. Jon's hands sank into the fur, and the warmth there taught his fingers how to be grateful. He laughed once, low, under his breath, and Ghost lifted his head and panted and made a small sound that was not quite a whine and not quite a growl. It was the noise a heart makes when it remembers its duty. After that, the dreams were fewer. There is a superstition among men who keep animals in hard places that if a creature returns to you after hunger, you will not die soon. Jon did not believe in superstitions except when the world insisted, and then he believed as well as any peasant and better than most lords. He took Ghost with him along the top on bad days, and the bad days learned to keep their distance. Val left the wall with Wraith and a dozen hand-picked ghost walkers one afternoon, when the sky had decided to be a color somewhere between iron and lead, and stay that way, until men forgot that light has degrees. She went to fetch Tormund's ragged rest of a people who had slid away from the first taking of the wall, and to tell those who had hidden in caves that caves were not churches, and to bring back any wise man who had ever knapped glass or put heat into stone, until it remembered its shape. "Bring me some who know the old Psalms," Mance said, kissing his son's hair and Val's brow in the same movement. "Bring me men whose knives know where winter keeps its joints." "And if I do not," Val said evenly, "I will bring you fewer enemies." She returned 7 nights later, with the bad tooth's boy limping and grinning, and with 3 women who could set obsidian into bone without cutting their fingers, and 2 men with the look of leafless branches who sang under their breath when frightened, and thereby frightened other men less, and a small, mad herd of shaggy goats who go where a day needs to go, whether men intended her. She brought word, too, of blue in the far trees that moved like an idea, and of a place where snow fell up for a heartbeat and then returned to itself. She had a scratch on her cheek that she told no story about. John saw where the skin at the edge of her mouth had chapped and thought, oddly, that it made her look kinder. He did not say so. He told her he was glad to see her alive and meant it as if he had said something clever. The wedding, the grant, the ditch, the dead. It made a shape of months that had not yet been months. Men who had found the first freeholders of the new gift comical began to notice they built fences in straight lines and were not troubled by storms that sent Southron farmers to prayer. Men who had thought all wildlings wore knives in their hands found some wore them in their mouths and could tell a joke that kept you from wanting to cut your own throat. Men who had thought black cloaks could never be anything but crows learned, grudgingly, that crows will fight wolves if wolves threaten the nest. It was an education written in cold, which is the surest ink. The Boltons tried once more to turn the talk south. Ramsay's men put a sheep in a sack and painted it with soot and pushed it through a gap in the dike at night with a string attached and meant it to be mistaken for a child and shot when someone tried to rescue it. The string slipped. The sheep ran into a then's legs and the then's spear killed it, because a spear is honest, even when a man is not. In the morning they found the string and laughed without any joy in it. Stannis' mouth went hard to one side as if he had been struck there. "We will be finished with them when winter allows," he said. And if the sentence looked like a small fort he had built in his mind and garrisoned with 10 men, at least those 10 were stubborn. John sat with ink too many nights, and with Aemon's cracked old voice making counsel, and with Davos' square hands making maps that had never been drawn, and with Mance's laugh returning to him in odd corners, like a raven that refuses to be chased away. He dreamed of a spring, still, when his mind had the uglier hours to itself. He let himself make a garden there, and put Ghost into it nosing in onion tops, and an old man with white eyes sitting in the sun as if it belonged to him. In that dream Melisandre walked by and did not burn anything, and Stannis took off his armor and let the light find the skin of his arms and did not complain about it. In that dream he could not hear horns. Horns came nevertheless. They came one evening when the men of Eastwatch had made a stew that satisfied more men than it offended, and the wind had forgotten for a handful of hours to come down on the camp like an iron lid. They came from the west this time, 2 short and 1 that went long, and then longer as if the lung behind it had been taught not to give up. Men surged, spilling cups, leaving bowls to form small glaciers in the slop yard. The note was not the dead's, it was men's, and yet the hair at the back of Joan's neck made all the same decisions. He ran for the parapet before he thought about it. Ghost ran with him, a flash of white in the human mess. Above the west road, the sky was a different gray, and men were beneath it, coming on a line that was not careful enough to be a marching order and not ragged enough to be rout. Their banners were dark, and their horses low, and between them all walked men with spears with the faces of men who had seen a longer night than this one and had decided to live in spite of it. When finally the wind took mercy and lifted the leading banner out and made it show itself. It showed a black great bear and a green pine and a white field hard as bone. "The mountain clans," Davos said behind Joan's shoulder, and John had the childish urge to hug him for that simple word. The Norries came first, with faces like Cliff's faces and boots that had learned hunger's gait, and behind them wolves and flints and littles and other names that had not heard a king's order in a generation and did not care that one had been given now. They came up to the ditch and stopped where the ditch asked them to, and then laughed and called names across it to men who had slept rougher than they had and were glad to find someone worse off. In an hour, there were arms around shoulders and cups in hands, and the world a hair less cruel. Stannis came down into that sudden warmth with something like satisfaction. They answer a better law. He admitted to no one and everyone, and better law comes written on winter. We will make use of them. Make place. With them, Mance said at his elbow. Not to him, but not quite away. Not for them. Stannis made a noise in his throat that would have been a laugh if a life's habit had not made such noises expensive. As you insist, he said. With. And the days moved again. Scouting bands went out with clanmen whose eyes read hills the way a septon reads a homily when he is not bored. A boy from the wolves, who was not old enough to shave, taught a sailor how to make his breath go to his feet when the ground betrayed him, and the sailor taught the boy to make a slip knot he could untie with a yank when his fingers had become scausages. A Nori woman sat by a fire and told a free folk child a story about a bear who married a woman, and the woman who did not mind that he sometimes forgot to be a man, and the child slept without crying for his mother. In the hall, Alice Karstark stood with her husband's bronze people and spoke the names of fields beyond Karhold, and men listened and did not say she was a woman because the names fitted their mouths like bread. One evening when the air had that metallic edge, it gets before cruelty, Davos came into the hall with snow in his eyebrows and a piece of silk in his hand. He put the silk on the table and smoothed it with care as if it might tear if any man were impatient with it. On it was drawn a fish so fat and smug that it barely fit itself, in a hand that had learned drawing in leisure and liked to remind men of that leisure when it wrote. Manderley's sign, Davos said. In code enough for a child not to read it, and plain enough for a hungry man too. He will send grain. He will send men. He asks for a Stark. Dine? He will get a Karstark, Stannis said, not unpleased with his wit. Davos' mouth turned wry. He will ask for a wolf. I told him I would bring him one, and the only one I have found is made of glass. He told me glass can cut as well. Dandawah. Jon thought of Rickon, wild as a spring and untaught and loved, and of Bran walking where no man walks, and of Sansa with southern songs in her throat and iron under them, and of Arya with her brave little anger like a knife she whetted every night with tears. He set the thought aside with the clumsiness of a man setting down a jug that is too full. There was the wall, and the ditch, and the dead, and the living who needed him to tell them where to put the next post. He did that. He put posts in the world with words and with hands and with small kindnesses that cost him dearer every day. He held the horn and did not blow it. He took Ghost with him when he went up and down because the wolf's presence taught his feet to trust edges. He slept when he could and learned the names of new freehold fields. Brownback Meadow, Old Crow's Gift, Hard Snow, Wife's Hope, and thought how men bury their fear in names and then are surprised when the names get up and walk. And winter pressed in, and the dead tested seams, and Stannis measured his south with a miser's pen, and Mance watched the lines of the camps with the air of a man who has written a tune and is not sure whether the next note will land, and Val moved through it all like a lion of Cold River in which men could see themselves briefly and more truly than they lied. On a day when the light came sideways and turned every drift into a blade, a scouting band brought in a figure found walking alone on the ice of a frozen stream west of Molestown, curved like a question mark against the wind. He wore furs that had not been his first and a black cloak cut short, and his hands were bound behind him with the careful knots of men who have tied the same man a dozen times. He came into the yard on his own feet, and when he lifted his head the yard rustled like startled straw. Mance, Rayder. Someone whispered reflexively, and then laughed at themselves in discomfort. Because Mance was already there, near the well, with his son on his shoulder and a knife at his belt, and the half-grin of men who find surprises they have ordered. The man was not Mance, but he carried Mance in little ways. An angle of the jaw, the aside glance, the casual insolence of bare head under a sky that had earned hats. He did not struggle when his captors urged him to the middle of the yard. He looked at Jon and then at Mance and then at Stannis as if he had been told to present himself and had obeyed, and the obedience bored him and entertained him, both. Rattleshirt, Tormund called cheerfully from the steps. Look at you, you ugly crow. I liked you better in bones. The man grinned, and it was Mance's grin. Melisandre stood at the edge of the yard with her red heart, her eyes bright and narrow, and she was not surprised because she had seen this trick in fire before she made it. The king without a crown. She said, half to herself, half to the day. Sometimes a song must be taught to wear another man's mouth. Men murmured. They liked witch talk best when it came wrapped around a tale they could tell later to boys and make them shiver. Stannis had no patience. Ain, he said. The word clipped. Melisandre's hands were careful. We changed his face, she said simply. Your Grace asked a king. I gave you a king. I kept the one who could be of use. Mance said nothing. He looked at the man with his grin and his walk and his rope-bound hands, and his eyes did a hard small thing that no man in the yard would name aloud, and all men recognized. Bones, is it? He said softly. You came back in skin. Brave or mad. Now, indemned you. Some of each, the man in Mance's shape said easily, and a little of a woman's vanity. She wanted to see if she could. Can you sing? Tormund demanded, delighted with the world's audacity. I can, the man said, and smiled as if it hurt. If there were tricks under the trick, if there were plans within the plan, the day pretended not to notice. Men went about their work under the complicated arrangement of kings and liars and winter, and a ditch that held when it could and pretended when it could not. Ghost walked under the parapets, and left a bright string of red on the white where he had stepped on his own tail, and did not complain because pride is a wolf's disease too. Jon laughed once at that, startled by it. It felt good. The next knock would come from a south he had not named yet. Letters from White Harbor that asked for a wolf with a living claim, and promised men with knives under their napkins. A raven from the Iron Bank that smelled of metal and cold decisions. A message from a woman at Deepwood Mott with an iron woman's stubbornness embedded in it like a nail, and a scrap of rumor that said the Dreadfort had sent its dogs to Winterfell to talk it to obey, and the house had not. Those would be tomorrow's snow. He had today's ice to walk, and today's horn not to blow, and today's fence to set, and today's kindness to give a tired boy who had cut his palm setting obsidian into a shaft and pretended it did not hurt. He went to the parapet at last light, and stood where he had stood on his first night on the wall, and where he would stand on his last, and the wind looked at him, and said nothing, and the world was a book made of cold and old voices. He did not read it all. He read enough to keep men living one more day. He put his hand on the ice, and it spoke its old ship groan to him, and he answered with the steadier sound of a man drawing breath in, and letting it out and drawing it in again. Ghost stood at his knee. The dead waited. The living worked. Kings measured. The horn lay quiet. For one long, long moment as the light failed he saw it, the future he had been trying to draw to himself with ink and argument and hunger. Not a great victory, not a story of men who do not break, but a small stubborn holding. Fields under dirty snow with green under the dirty. Fences not blown down. Children who cried for their mothers and then stopped because their mothers came. Men who, at night, told each other of a day's work done instead of a death avert. He felt the shape of that world in his throat and on his skin, as if it had walked up behind him and put its hands over his eyes and made him guess. He did not turn. He kept looking north. Light thinned, and the ice sang its night song, and somewhere far down in the forest a white hare listened. And the gates at the wall remembered the hour, and the way they swung and sighed once as the latest of Mance's people came through in a small brave line. Older men with their burdens, two girls bent under the same skin of water, a boy with a dog and a knife, a boy with a dog at his heels. They passed, and Jon watched, and the night took them in as the world kept turning its slow wheel toward whatever spring men would earn.